Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to call this meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council to order. If we could all join in the Pledge of Allegiance. Madam Clerk, if you could do the roll call, please.
Certainly. Councilmember Dominguez, not yet present. Councilmember Rouse. Councilmember Sin.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Friedman.
Here.
Councilmember Harmon.
Here.
Councilmember Gutierrez.
Here.
And Mayor Murillo is not present.
Great. On to public comment for items not on the agenda. Are there any speaker slips, Mr. Casey? Hearing none, I will close public comment, and I will move on to the item 2, the public hearing for the fiscal year 2020 recommended operating and capital budgets. And I will turn it over to our library director, Ms. Cadiente.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Friedman, City Council, Jessica Cadiente, Library Director for the City of Santa Barbara. I will be presenting today on the library's proposed FY20 budget. I have with me today Acting Library Services Manager Christina Hernandez and Acting Library Services Manager Molly Wetta. And I do want to take the opportunity to thank them for their stellar job that they've done over the past few months in helping us deliver this budget. Before I get into the numbers, I do want to spend just a minute talking about the mission of the Santa Barbara Public Library. So it's simple: educate, captivate, connect. Education is the first core principle of the Santa Barbara Public Library because we believe that education is the key to the success of our community. And we offer both in-class instruction, one-on-one tutoring, as well as hundreds of opportunities for self-directed learning at the library. And we believe in creating that equal access to education and opportunity for everyone. And we are a true partner in the educational system of our city. Captivate. We strive to be the place in the city of Santa Barbara where you can experience what you possibly could not experience otherwise. So for some people, that is technology such as virtual reality or 3D printing. For others, it's getting access to early literacy classes or coding classes for their children or participating in a social justice book club. Connection. We are the true connector in the city of Santa Barbara. We connect people to resources, people to services, readers to their books, and people to people. We really strive to be the hub of our city. And, on that, I really want to thank the City Council for always supporting the library, and Mr. Casey and Ms. Antill as well, because the library's had a lot of change and transition over the last few years. Some of it's been easy, some of it not so much. So I just want to thank you all for your support during that time. Now, going over our presentation outline, I will give a very brief departmental overview and then go over the general fund and county library fund proposed fiscal year plans. And then Ms. Hernandez and Ms. Wetta will discuss our FY19 achievements as well as our FY20 performance objectives. And then I will wrap things up with the capital improvement projects for the library. The total fund of the library department is $6.52 million. The city libraries are 87% of that, with the county libraries being 13% or $849,000. And this does represent the departure of Buellton and Solvang from the system. So next year we'll have 4 branches in Carpinteria, Montecito, Eastside, and the Central Library. This is the organizational chart of the library department. We are going back to the 2 library services managers in lieu of the 1 assistant director. So you can see we have 3 management positions, 4 supervisory, 2 administrative, 10 professional librarians, 14 paraprofessionals, and then roughly 25,000 hours of hourly hours at the library. And this is for all 4 branches. The library department has a few reclassifications. The assistant library director, as I mentioned, we are changing that along with the senior librarian to the 2 library services managers. And then we have a senior library technician position that we are reclassifying to a circulation supervisor. No additional budgetary appropriations were needed for this, so this is really an organizational change. This shows the total FTE by program, so you can see the administrative program growing to 5. That is not reflected in your budget book, so that will be updated later in the process. And then you see the 7 programs here, and we'll be going down to the 5. We are losing 2 FTE with the departure of Buellton and Solvang, so that's where you see the total FTEs rounding out to 33 for fiscal year 20. So now I'll just get into the numbers. for the general fund. Library fines and fees. So as discussed at Finance Committee, the library is proposing to go fine-free this year. So this $12,000 change from budget is reflective of that. Moving down to rents. This is the room rentals for Faulkner Gallery or Eastside MLK Room. And as the library continues to expand its programming and do more in its own spaces, we've seen a steady decline in the revenue that we receive from renting the rooms to the public. Intergovernmental, this is where the county per capita or any government grants are located. We have several grants that are sunsetting next year. And then the county per capita is at this point holding steady at the $7.80. Service charges. So as I mentioned, Buellton and Solvang are leaving. And so while this budget does reflect a move from 13.5% admin fee to 18% administrative fee charged to the county libraries, we're still seeing a decrease in the amount overall that we received this year. Donations. We had a few significant donations over the past couple of years, but we wanted to put in a realistic number for FY20 as we're not projecting getting those large donations again. And then library gifts, we receive an endowment every year that the Santa Barbara Foundation holds for us, and it's based on the last 3 years of market, and so we've seen that decline a little bit as well. Going into expenditures, salaries and benefits, the 1.7% increase is reflective of both the cost of living as well as benefit increases within all of the programs. And we did also cut $140,000 from our hourly budget in order to commit to balance the budget this year. Supplies and services, as I spoke to in the revenues, the grants that we would allocate to this line item are sunsetting, and so we do have to remove those costs here in this line item. Supplies and services is also where you would find our black gold fees, which did go up this year pretty significantly as well. Allocated costs, those are the charges that are charged to us from the city for things like HR and payroll. We had a slight decrease in our custodial overheads. That's reflective of the $51,000. We do not have any special projects. And then book acquisitions, the $102,000 change from budget. For fiscal year FY19, in order to balance, the library did cut $100,000 from its materials budget, but we were able to mitigate that throughout the year using salary savings, but we are budgeting the status quo for $56,000. This is the overall general fund expenditures for the library, for the city libraries, and you can see salaries and benefits taking up 67%. The programming piece at 2%, those are really our discretionary monies, the monies that we can use for public programming, but we also buy office supplies out of that line as well. I just want to take a moment to discuss security and safety at the library, as we are requesting to put in money this year for security at the library. We've been evaluating the number of incidents that occur at Central specifically. Last year we had just over 400, and we are well on our way to doubling that number in the year 2019. And looking at how much time staff are spending in dealing with incidents and the cost of that, we do trainings, such as we received a grant this year for mental health, and we do social services. We brought CityNet to the library and things like that, and we do talk about those services in the library. But what this is working to address are the actual security and threatening behaviors that occur from people on a daily basis, either transient or people experiencing homelessness, or neither of those. We really don't ask their housing status when they are threatening at the library, but we are requesting that we do contract security services for next fiscal year. Proposed fee changes. So I'll go through these quickly as were presented at Finance Committee. So we are looking to go back to the Monday through Sunday fee schedule for our meeting rooms, as we found it to be burdensome to our nonprofit users to have the higher fees on the weekend, and it also helps library staff in just having one set rate. We are planning for the future of Library Plaza and incorporating a new fee. We looked at venues throughout Santa Barbara to find a competitive cost, and the $450 was both competitive and fair. the elimination of daily overdue fines. So currently the library charges 25 cents per day up to an $8 maximum, and we are requesting to do away with that fee. You can see on the right-hand side the implications of that for every branch within our system. Some of the benefits of eliminating fines: increasing patron access to materials and services. The punitive daily overdue fee really just it suspends people and dissuades people from ever even getting a library card in the first place. We want to reduce the inequitable impact of overdue fines. Essentially, if you have the disposable income to pay your fines, you do. But if you're choosing between rent or food, you're going to pay those before paying your fines. And so we see that time and time again. And then we want to improve the relationships with our community, because what we do is about education and access, and having this negative discussion with our users really deflects from that mission. And then optimizing library staff time. We did a time analysis and it revealed that we're spending 10 times the amount in staff time than we are collecting in revenue for this. And then I do want to clarify that we are looking to get rid of the daily overdue fine, not lost or damaged items. So those fees would still be in place. And here are the administrative changes, and we did update D to state at 60 days overdue, the account will be referred to a materials recovery service instead of saying the collection agency. And then just as an example, some libraries that are also in the state of California that have removed fines from their fee schedule. Now I'll go over the county fund this time. So the county fund has had a lot of transition over the last couple of years, and so FY19 still has some monies in there from Goleta. So we did a payout, so that's why it looks larger. So looking at the FY20 recommended, that represents Montecito and Carpinteria, whereas the big swings and the large changes are due to the fact that we're pulling Buellton and Solvang out of the system. So you can see the bottom line for county libraries is that this draft budget has them at $625,971 for their revenues. And then looking at the current expenditures, that is at $848,000. So the county, as well as the city of Carpinteria, are working to close the gap for the county libraries. At this time, the city of Carpinteria has committed to helping close the gap for that city, and the Montecito Library is still working with the county. And I do want to just follow up on something that was put forth last year budget season, was to do a full communication plan and work better with our friends groups and stakeholders. So we did hire a consultant. We had a full in-service day where all of our friends groups from Zone 1 came and participated. I hope that it's the first of an annual event where they can all get together and really working to increase communication and transparency. We're currently working on an MOU. I, along with other Friends Group members and Library Advisory Committee members from the county, serve on a county ad hoc committee where we are discussing governance issues, funding issues, and trying to make the county system long-term sustainable so that we don't have these conversations every day or every year about the costs to keep the libraries open. That is the budget piece. So at this time, I can hand it over to Ms. Hernandez, or would you like take a question?
Councilman Rouse has a question.
Real quick, Ms. Cadiente, going back to the issues with security and whatnot on the library grounds. At one point in time, we had a conversation with Mr. Garza and his ambassador program, and they agreed they had the capacity to make a loop through the library. Have you had a chance to cooperate with them, and has that been helpful?
Councilmember Rouse, we have discussed different options such as ambassadors or the VIPs, and they do come through the library. It is that need for the consistent presence in the library, so we have people to respond to an immediate threat at that time. So having somebody stationed or positioned in the library is truly what we need.
And when you talked about the amount of staff time and hours of the dollar value of that dealing with these issues, do you have a budget besides that for, or is that just, is there a security budget as well?
At this time, there is no
There's
security
not.
budget. That is just staff time that we're using today that could be used for better purpose.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Sneddon?
Mr. Mayor, just to clarify, but we are proposing as part of the budget for next fiscal year to have a security budget in there to provide some security at the library and try it out.
Would this be a separate private security firm, or would it be something we do with staff? Or
At this point, we're thinking a private security firm, see how it works, see if it fits the needs. But it's, staff's dealing with a constrained environment and with some tough clientele, and sometimes they issue, I forget, when you ban someone from the library for a period of time, and then they come back, and so it's a confrontational experience. And so I think we need to try something new.
thank you.
I suppose that was going to be my question. Is the protocol for when there is a security issue, is that just removal from the premises for a certain amount of time, or is that the details still to be worked out later?
In working with a security firm, if that's the route we go, that would need to be worked out. We do have a full procedure for library staff to follow.
Okay. And this would be for someone to be there around the clock?
That would be the hope, Councilmember Sneddon. We did discuss within our Black Gold Cooperative what our other libraries doing, and Santa Maria and San Luis Obispo, being the two larger libraries in that cooperative, both do have full-time security, and it is private.
I'm fully supportive. And you had mentioned before security cameras. Would this be in addition to or part of the same budget that came up?
Councilmember Sneddon, we installed security cameras as part of last year's CIP program.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Hartman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I made these comments at Finance Committee, but I just want to state them again publicly, how much I appreciate you doing the work to bring us fine-free. I truly appreciate the library's commitment to equity and access, and this is something that's really important to me, and I'm so supportive of this action, so thank you.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Friedman and members of the council. I'm Christina Hernandez, and I will be taking a look back at FY19 at our highlights and some of our accomplishments this past year. So the first thing that I want to look at is early literacy and parent support. At the Central Library, we host now 10 weekly story times with an average of 1,300 in attendance every month. We have doubled our number of classes and nearly tripled the number of attendees from 2017 to 2018. And in addition to this, we've added 2 new styles of classes, so those being early literacy stations and STEAM stations. So this is a more hands-on sensory approach for children. So you'll come in and you'll see water tables and kinetic sand and a ball pit, or you'll see young children making letters out of Play-Doh. So those are the hands-on experiences that we're also adding, as well as a Baby and Me bilingual story time. Other things that we're doing are classes for parents and caregivers. So we partner with the Kegel Autism Center as well as other experts and UCSB, and they come in and focus on topics that are in support of parents. And this has been great not only for those parents, but for UCSB education students as well, because for many of them, this is the first time that they've come into the library. So it's been beneficial for students as well as for parents and caregivers. Our summer reading and learning program continues to be one of our most important initiatives throughout the year. This year, we've had our adult participation has increased 272% from the previous year, and that is system-wide. Teens have increased 150% participation system-wide. We also encourage our kids throughout the summer to read about 20 minutes a day, so 1,000 minutes read by the end of summer. And this past year, kids logged almost 1 million minutes of reading. So we're really proud of this statistic. And so another big thing for our library is that we like to bring the library out into the community by doing outreach and off-site programming. So this past year, we offered 174 programs off-site, reaching over 4,000 individuals. And we also partnered with nearly 100 local businesses, and that is for many of those businesses provide prizes for participants as well as offer locations for us to host off-site programming. Santa Barbara Reads 2018. So this is our large annual Community Reads program, and it's generously funded by the Santa Barbara Public Library Foundation. And this past year, we celebrated the title Frankenstein. It was the 200th anniversary, so that was really popular. We distributed 1,600 copies of the book. That's both in schools and inside the library, and some of those were the actual copy of Frankenstein, but others were unique titles or similar titles with the theme, because it's an all-ages event. And we had partnerships with various businesses and organizations throughout the community. You can see the photo in the right-hand side is one of our Frankenstein-themed cocktails that were made by a local restaurant. And our hope for this year is to continue and expand those partnerships with businesses to get even more participation in the community in our Community Reads program. Classes and events for adults. So this year we've done many things for adults. Our thematic learning initiative, so this is in partnership with UCSB Arts and Lectures, and we co-host programs that spark learning to initiate change and empowerment. And this can be in the form of films or lectures or book discussion groups, any number of types of programs we host with thematic learning initiatives. We offer civic engagement opportunities, such as our Book to Action program this year, looking at food insecurity in Santa Barbara County. We also host opportunities for participation, such as our League of Women Voters Forum, so people can come and discuss important issues to them. We have concerts, so you can come into our large Faulkner Gallery and see an opera concert, or you can hear a gospel choir or our Make SB rock concerts that are held right inside the middle of the library. We have a hiking series that's very popular every month. We average about 80 in attendance each month, and we have 10 book clubs, so there's something for everybody there in our book clubs. Our learning technology series also, so this is for like basic computing classes to also 3D printing classes for adults. And then we have several author visits throughout the year. This year we've hosted Jared Krasoska, Megan Carney, which is our Book to Action author of Unending Hunger, and other people as well, like Susan Orlean. Our SBPL Works program, this is actually booming in our adult education center. So SBPL Works is a career and job readiness program. So clients can come in and receive one-on-one coaching on job searching, resume building, interview skills, and they have access to our online resources as well. We've had SBPL Works for about 2 years now, and already we have over 200 unique clients that come in, and 80% of them report that they have either reached their goal that they've set for themselves upon entering the program, or they have attained employment. And with the state library grant, we are now proud to offer lynda.com classes to the entire community. And we also do make that available as well to all city staff. And as part of that state library grant, we are currently expanding our SBPL Works program to our Eastside Branch Library. And this includes staffing, equipment, access to the resources as well. And some of our Eastside Branch highlights. So 1 million cups. We're really excited about 1 million cups. There's currently about 136 communities across the nation that are participating in this. And so we are proud to bring it to our Eastside Branch Library in Santa Barbara. And this is an opportunity for local entrepreneurs and up-and-coming business owners to gather once a week and network and make connections with each other and actually learn from each other as well. And then also to our East Side Library, we are bringing Stay and Play early literacy program. So Stay and Play is a grant-funded pilot program with 6 libraries in California, and we are happy to be one of those 6 libraries. And this is a more fluid approach. It's aimed at getting support to friends, family, and neighbors who are caregivers of small children. So they can come in and hear stories. They can play with toys or on our early literacy stations. There's a snack, and they can connect with each other. And oftentimes we will have guest speakers come in as well. So it's a less structured approach. Often we see family members or grandparents who are the caregivers of children. So this is intended to provide even more support for them. And our bilingual services. So all of these things throughout the year, all of our programs, initiatives, that is all made possible thanks to our bilingual support from staff. We currently have 5 full-time staff members who are bilingual and 10 hourly staff. We have 2 more full-time staff members in process now, so hopefully that number will come up to 7 soon. And our bilingual support is primarily in our youth services department, working with families, also in our adult education center, and then of course when we do our outreach to local schools and other organizations. Also day-to-day, our customer service is supported by bilingual staff. We answer literacy questions. We often help parents, refer them to needed resources as well, and we also get calls for city services in which we have to translate for them as well. So thank you so much for your time. I will hand this over to Molly Weta for FY20.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tempore Friedman and the rest of the council members. As Christina went over everything that we've accomplished this last year, we're excited to begin embarking on our FY20 goals. And first, I want to briefly touch on the Student Success Initiative, which will be going into more detail at the joint City Council School Board meeting on Thursday. But currently, the library coordinates getting students library cards with individual teachers when they visit the library for a field trip or we go to their classroom. It's a cumbersome manual process. For students that are under 13, we have to send a piece of paper form home to get signatures from parents or guardians and then manually enter that into the database. And for older students, we have to have them fill out an online form, but it's still a manual process for us to create those cards. And as a result, it's inefficient and unequal. Not all students are getting this opportunity. And because of this, only 5,000 kids ages 5 to 18 have library cards, when there are 15,000 students in the SB Unified School District alone, not counting all of the other smaller districts in our service area. So because of this, the library has been working with the school district to implement a process that would allow parents or guardians of students to opt in to receive a library card at enrollment. The library and the district are working out the details of an MOU to allow for student data to be digitally transferred to the library so we can import student records and issue library cards tied to their student ID number. And automating this process and offering it to everyone will give students more access to the library's materials and support their academic achievement. And this initiative is one of the primary reasons why we wanted to pursue eliminating overdue fines, because that's a huge barrier for classes and students to access library resources. So adult education expansion. As Christina told you, we had all of these initiatives for last year, and we're just have more planned for the upcoming year. Through grant funding and partnerships with community organizations, we're launching Veterans Connect, which provides services for those that have served to get the benefits and navigate that federal systems that administer them. The library is also working with the City Human Resources Department to refer applicants to city jobs to our SBPL Work Services, because the city HR is going completely online with their application process, and we don't want people that are qualified applicants otherwise to not be able to apply just because they don't have internet and computer access at home or are unfamiliar with those online systems. So we'll be working with them to roll that out. And then the library is also participating as part of a matching grant to offer access to Career Online High School. So this is a fully accredited high school diploma program for older adults who want to, work on their high school diploma. Additionally, our adult literacy program is going to be launching a pre-ESL course. We've been training bilingual tutors to work with learners who aren't ready to learn to read in English because they don't have grammar and spelling skills in their native language. And so we're working on those foundational skills in their native language to prepare them to learn English. We are also going to be looking to improve our internet access at the library. Over the last couple years, the staff have worked to upgrade the library's internet connection to high-speed broadband fiber at all locations, but our next steps are going to involve assessing our access and usage and planning for needed upgrades to infrastructure to ensure that we have a network that can fully leverage those higher speeds. The Tiny Libraries on State Street. This is a project in collaboration with the city and the Santa Barbara County Office of Arts and Culture. So the library is part of a public art initiative to place tiny libraries on State Street. A member of library staff reviewed the artist submissions with a team of community members in the arts, and library staff will be curating the books from donations and organizing volunteers to stock and maintain them from June through September. So these are going to be placed on the pads where the pianos go traditionally during October, and it has family-friendly programming that will accompany it. So on first Thursdays in June, you can stop out and see them, and we'll be having pop-up programming at the 3 of the sites. All right, I also want to go over one of our really exciting initiatives to further our science, technology, engineering, art, and math education. Over the last several years, we've really been ramping up this aspect of our programming, and over the course of the next couple months, we'll be offering programs about space exploration, astronomy, and physics. This includes opportunities to learn about satellite communication by building our own models of the International Space Station with circuitry kits, building our own telescopes, cooking up a comet, and many other more hands-on activities for kids and all ages. We'll have the opportunity to hear about Mars exploration from an engineer working at NASA's Jet Propulsion Lab. We'll celebrate the 50th anniversary of the moon landing with a family-friendly learning event. And ultimately, we'll be contacting the International Space Station over amateur radio, and a dozen or so young people from our community will have the opportunity to ask questions directly to an astronaut. This is part of a program in conjunction with NASA and the amateur radio. So we'll be working with our local ham group to make all of this happen. And so it's a really exciting, once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that is supposed to inspire kids to really think about future careers in engineering, technology, and science. And then, of course, we'll be just continuing to integrate these STEAM concepts into our weekly and monthly after-school programs over the summer. So we'll be looking forward to that. Homework help enhancement. Over the last year, we've seen a shift in the needs of the students attending our drop-in homework help program. With the expansion of on-site at each individual school's homework programs, we've seen declining attendance, which is good news because when we launched this program 6 or 7 years ago, those opportunities didn't exist. And especially for Spanish-speaking families, the library was their go-to resource for that. However, of the people that we still see attending, we've noticed that they're not even able to try to answer a word problem in math because they don't have that foundation of reading skills. So they're never going to get to that where they are done learning to read and can read to learn. And so we're going to be switching our homework help program to a one-on-one program based on the Orton Gillingham approach to reading. So this is based on a curriculum that works great for kids with dyslexia, but is really going to help any struggling reader, no matter what reasons that they're struggling. So we've trained our first round of 10 volunteers in our first class last week, and we'll be matching those one-to-one and just continuing to roll that out so that every week they get an hour of one-on-one personalized instruction in this phonics-based curriculum so that we can really help them learn to read. And this is based on a successful model that started at the San Francisco Public Library. And now I want to switch from programming and talk about our collections. We've gone over all the numerous ways that the library supports education, from early literacy to workforce development, but essential to our mission is always going to be our books. We've introduced some new P3 measures this year to help gauge the health of our collections and show how responsive the library is to the informational needs of the community. To that end, we've started tracking this year how many patron requests we are able to fill, how successful we are at maintaining 4 holds for every item ratio on popular materials, just to keep those wait times sort of reasonable. And the same is true for our digital collections, ebooks and e-audiobooks, and also our databases and online learning platforms like lynda.com or Mango Languages. The demand for these are only growing, and it isn't trading off with the demand for print materials. So we're seeing both grow, while, as you saw, our budgets are remaining flat. So we've added some additional measures so that we can sort of track that. Last year, we added the average wait time for our overdrive materials, and we haven't been able to keep that consistently at 30 days, which was our goal. And this is due in large part to demand for high-profile books like Michelle Obama's, new biography. But overall, that as soon as we add more titles to kind of give people more choice and variety, those quickly grow long holds lists too. So this is something that we're going to be continually to evaluate. The demand is only growing, and we don't anticipate that dying off, so we're going to have to look at ways to, balance our collections and gauge that. And then we just want to highlight some of the goals for our Eastside Library. They are looking at expanding their teen programming. For the last 5 months, the Eastside Library has formed a teen advisory board with a goal of giving youth a place to grow leadership skills and become more involved in their community. They're planning events for themselves, from gaming and movie nights, and are looking to create and implement programs for younger kids as well. The Eastside Library also received a grant for education on financial literacy, and a good portion of those events will focus on the teen audience. And they also will continue to offer career and college readiness programs, such as the popular college essay workshop. Another goal for next year for the Eastside Library is going to be assessing our relationship with the Adelante School. So the Eastside Library serves as their school library. They don't have one on their own premises. So classes visit every week. And we did a time analysis and realized that the Eastside Library staff spend 30% of their time assisting classes. And so we'll be looking to open up the conversation about how we can strengthen the relationship with the school, while also ensuring that we have staff capacity to conduct outreach to other members of the Eastside community and offer programming opportunities for all age groups, including, preschool age children and adults. And then we just wanted to talk a moment about what the Central Library does to coordinate initiatives system-wide. So we do system-wide training, which might be inviting Home for Good to do a workshop on addressing the needs of people experiencing homelessness. It might be a security training where we talk about ways to address security concerns in the library, but also focused on technology training for all staff as we introduce new initiatives or upgrades to our software and things such as that nature. So that's all coordinated by central staff for all of our locations. They also plan the Santa Barbara Reads and summer reading programs for all ages and coordinate youth services events so that they can occur at all of the locations. Like we might invite a zookeeper to participate in a curiosity club or a story time. And so the Central Library Youth Services librarian is sort of making those connections, scheduling them, and working with the locations. And then sharing the technology and programming kits. They've developed a system so that all of the robotics and other hands-on learning opportunities we have for school-age children can be shared at locations, all over Santa Barbara, so that we are maximizing the use of all of those resources. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Ms. Cadiente for capital improvements.
Okay, thank you. It's wrapping up today with the capital improvement program for FY20. So our funded projects, just want to provide a little update. We are funded for the lower level remodel. That work is going really well. That is where all of our central library staff outside of administration work. So we're really excited about our new design. I think it's going to be flexible. It's going to allow our staff to really use the entire space in a more efficient way. And then the Central Library ADA compliant elevator. We're so thankful that this is a part of the CIP program and it's on the list to be funded in FY21. We'll be doing the design process throughout the rest of this fiscal year. That is not the actual design, but it will be a signature piece in the city of Santa Barbara. People will come to the library just to ride the elevator, I assure you. The Central Library currently has an automated materials handler on the main level that takes in all of the returns from patrons entering the library, but we do a significant amount of shipment and delivery on the lower level. And so as part of the lower level redesign, we will be installing the same AMH down on the lower level. This will allow for staff efficiency as well as the reduction in possible injury and things like that from all of the heavy lifting and similar movements that occur in shipment. And then the East Side Library, our facilities division with Public Works has been doing a fantastic job working on the East Side Library. New roof, paint on the exterior and interior is planned, new flooring. And then the Central Library staff are looking at the interior and coordinating the color choices as well as the furniture choices that we hope to launch at the end of this year. I'm looking to create a more even sight-lined space that you can see from one area all of what's happening in the East Side Library and create a flexible space so that if you want to do a quick story time, everything moves out of the way. And then just a quick update on the Library Plaza. We've had several meetings with our stakeholders and the interest and excitement for what Library Plaza could bring in terms of expanding the programmatic opportunities for the library as well as our community in the State Street corridor. We're getting a lot of excitement, but we are still working on the final design and the plans with our Public Works liaison and the landscape architect. We're trying to figure out how to manage the current pools of water there and either replacing them or making a flat area so that we can use the full space. And then some of our unfunded priorities, just things that are hanging out there. Our upper level is kind of our last frontier of the Central Library that we haven't really updated in many years. And we get a lot of requests for things such as meeting rooms, classroom space, and we'd really like to do a needs assessment and plan for that upper level at some point. And with that, the Central Library Teen Space. Our children's library has expanded opportunities for the youth in Santa Barbara and has been such an overwhelming success, but time and time again they graduate out of there and we don't really have a great space for them to go after they're about 11 or 12. So that's very high on our priority list. And with that, that concludes our presentation. We're happy to answer any questions.
Well, first I'd like to, before we get to any questions my colleagues have in public comment, I'd like to thank staff for your great presentation, all that you're doing, that our staff is doing, and our library and the service that it's providing. And before public comment, are there any questions from my colleagues? Hearing none, I'll go to public comment. We're seeing no lights on. Oh, it's not on. Councilman Dominguez.
Thank you. The Black Gold program, you said that the costs were going up. Is that something you anticipate for the near term, long term?
Councilmember Pro Tem Friedman, Councilmember Dominguez, Black Gold costs went up overall due to things such as delivery costs increasing and then data storage needs for our servers. Costs will continue to rise, and we're watching that and looking at the ROI that we get for being a part of the Black Gold Cooperative. So yes, I do anticipate costs increasing. As we move on, we're looking at doing a mission envisioning process with Black Gold to really identify and be very clear on what we expect to get out of that cooperative.
And is that program essential for the goals you have related to digital materials?
Councilmember Dominguez, we do pool money at Black Gold. We do put money into purchasing Overdrive in particular as a cooperative. And then we all do share those resources. And we do ship 2 million items a year across the Central Coast by being a part of the Black Gold Cooperative.
And how do those costs get dispersed?
So the Black Gold system has a funding formula that's based on your population, so the size of your service area as well as your circulation and then your technology use. So if you have a larger network, a lot more things on it, because Black Gold does serve as our network resource as well, then you'll pay more for that as the system.
And in terms of shipping the books, if we're shipping them away from the central library, for example, who pays the shipment costs?
So the Black Gold Cooperative receives a grant from the state of California that pays for a lot of the actual delivery costs. Now, we used to receive, that's where the state money used to be. We used to receive money for each item that we shared, essentially. That state money went away, I believe, in 2011.
So how did we backfill that?
The loss of the state money through various cuts or different, I wasn't here at that time for this library, but I'll say that all of the branch libraries, including Santa Barbara Central and Eastside, had to reduce in some way to mitigate that. That really hurt the branches because it was a large percentage of their revenue, whereas for a larger library like Central, not as big of an impact.
Okay. You mentioned the internet speed, trying to increase that. What's the target, or what's the type of internet we're trying to achieve?
So over the past year or two, as Ms. Hernandez spoke to, we installed fiber at all of our locations. So we worked with Black Gold and then the different companies, either Frontier or what have you, in that location to install the actual fiber. So each location is guaranteed up to 1 gigabyte of download speed. And at this point, what we're looking at is that our access points and wiring, it may not be up to the infrastructure to leverage the new fiber that we've installed. So that's what we'll be looking at. For the central library, we're hoping 5 gigabyte.
And those are for the desktop computers there, or is it for Wi-Fi as well?
Councilmember Dominguez, it would be for both.
Okay. And regarding Adelante and the services that you provide for them, what's the revenue or cost sharing there?
Councilmember Dominguez, at this point, there is no cost sharing, and that's what we'll be reviewing.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Seeing no lights on, I'll turn it over to public comment, and I have Jamie Allison, followed by Joan Young, and then Ann Howard. If you come up to the podium, you'll have 3 minutes to speak.
Hello, I'm in awe of what the Santa Barbara Public Library is offering our community, as I am the Santa Barbara Unified School District's first district elementary teacher librarian since 2011. So I'm really excited about our student success initiative. In fact, a couple years ago, Molly Wetta and I met to discuss and brainstorm ways that we could collaborate. And we are at that point where we're already piloting some of those activities. Children's librarian Holly Broman and I met and discussed ways we could offer something very meaningful to especially some of our Title I schools, namely Harding and Cleveland. And we decided to launch a 2-day pilot makerspace day to first graders and fifth graders and sixth graders to see what the response would be. It was overwhelming. The teachers loved it. They many commented on just having the time for them to freely explore activities in this space. So what we did is at Harding, Holly read an engaging engineer-themed book before releasing them to make-do activities. That's with cardboard and screws and tools. And I thought at first it'd be too much for them to manipulate, but they got right into it. They built structures that were amazing. And we pretty much could barely pull them away from the activity. Similarly, fifth grade students were introduced to engineering through a picture book and then released to manipulate Ozbots and snap circuits. Again, the use of engineering vocabulary could be heard at each table as they created and problem solved with their partners or in groups. We have one more Makerspace Day at the end of this month at Harding, and I'm hopeful we can integrate regular library makerspaces at all of our schools within the library. So thank you for this Student Success Initiative. This is just one area. I know it's K through 12. All of the sites are really excited for this partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Allison. Next is Joan Young, followed by Ann Howard, and then Lauren Trujillo.
Oh, you won't be able to see me. So short. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Friedman and council members. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. I've had the pleasure of serving on the Library Advisory Board for 3.5 years. My term ends at the end of 2019, and I'm so proud of everything that the library has done and also proud of the support from the council. You helped us on so many different issues, whether it was going to bat for the city libraries and the county libraries with the county, or helping us with the contract with the museum and all kinds of other issues. So we're very, very pleased to continue thanking you and appreciating the library. And, you know, from this presentation, you heard about all of the wonderful things that our library is doing, plans to do, and will do in the future. But I just ask you to turn the kaleidoscope a little bit and imagine what it's like for the librarians to be planning and implementing and doing all of these educational and creative activities while some of them are under threat. I don't know if you all saw the op-ed in the LA Times a few weeks ago by a young former librarian who chose to leave her chosen career because of the threats from patrons who were suffering from mental illness, homelessness, whatever. She eloquently described the PTSD that she experienced on a daily basis, and I would encourage you to think about the toll it takes on our city staff, on our librarians, on our community members as they are exposed. You heard that there were 400 incidents, thinking about 800 for all of 2019. That's more than 2 incidents a day. No amount of mental health in-service training or social service support can help to mitigate the ongoing impact on our city staff, on our librarians, and our community members. So I implore you to put your thinking caps on to think about creative and collaborative ways that we can solve this issue. It's not just here in Santa Barbara, it's all over the country. And every librarian all over the United States is thinking about this, worrying about it, dealing with it on a daily basis. So please help us with this next step, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Young. Next up is Ann Howard.
Mayor Pro Tem Friedman and council members, my name's Ann Howard. I volunteer at the library. I'm the board president of the Santa Barbara Public Library Foundation. The foundation, which began, as you may know, in 2012, is the library's fundraising partner for large-scale capital projects and large-scale initiatives like Santa Barbara Reads. As you know, we partnered with the library in funding our new children's library, which opened in 2015, and we established the Children's Library Endowment in 2016. Ever since then, we've seen this great growth in children's programming that new space made possible. And that included, of course, the library's heroic provision of impromptu programming during the twin disasters last year. But every day is a day of heroic effort at our library, at each of our city's libraries. I hope each one of you has visited either East Side or Central Library in the past few days or few weeks. Then you know what's going on there. Beyond providing a rich collection of books and all kinds of audio and visual resources, the library is a place of connection for anyone and everyone seeking literacy or language skills, work readiness, work advancement, job training, self-improvement, community participation, civic engagement, or just fun. On May the 4th, children learned how to make lightsabers, and the parents got to dress up like Luke Skywalker or Darth Vader or any of the other Star Wars characters. And the Force was with them. The library is a gathering place at the heart of our downtown, a critical and life-changing resource that you provide, thank you, for early readers, returning veterans, young professionals, rich and poor, housed and unhoused. We stand ready to improve that gathering space, and we're pleased to be in a new public and private partnership with you, with the city, as we plan for the city's new library plaza. We're eager to show potential donors how a 21st century library plaza can bring the library's work outside the walls and create an accessible, safe, inviting, and environmentally sound public space right in the heart of our downtown cultural district. I can't wait to begin to show those potential donors the actual space after August, when the Art Museum's contract for use of that space expires. I'm proud to support our fine library and our creative, hardworking librarians, which you've just seen on display here, and I'm so grateful for the skilled leadership of our library director, Jessica Cariente. Our library changes lives, and you make that possible, and our librarians are the heroes who make that possible. Thanks.
Thank you. Next up is Lauren Trujillo, followed by Milt Hess, and our final speaker is Daryl Sheck.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Friedman and council members. My name is Lauren Trujillo, and I'm honored to be the new foundation director of the Santa Barbara Public Library Foundation. I'm now entering my 6th month as foundation director, and I continue to be blown away by our library, as you've seen today in this presentation as well. The library runs on a budget that requires our librarians to be super creative, and they work magic with this limited funding. I've seen the diversity of our library, the wonderful staff in action, and all of the resources our library offers to our community. As foundation director, I felt it was important to be visible and have a presence in the library as the foundation director, and I asked if we could set up my desk on the 2nd floor of the library next to the microfilm, which is actually a very hot spot in the library. In a normal working day, I will see the regulars come in, adults learning languages, a book club meeting, locals and tourists using the microfilm machine for research, teens laughing and studying, and people of all ages receiving computer training. It is a space where all are welcome, and this is just on the 2nd floor. The foundation's motto is "We open doors," and our public library has so much potential to open doors, grow, and provide a safe, accessible space that provides needed resources. I could go on and on about all of the things that the library provides, and you've seen it today. But the library is more than books, and it is outgrowing the space available. We live in an area where it is sunny an average 283 days out of the year. We need to take this programming outside and create even more opportunities and resources. The foundation is working on our next campaign project, the Plaza Project, and our public library is in need of a welcoming entrance that reflects the work of the great librarians. However, it is difficult to show the needs of and potential of this space when the current space is obstructed by construction. So we are looking forward to this August date. If we want to make this public-private partnership work, we will need the plaza to be visible. We need to show the community the current space does not support a modern library and is not accessible for all patrons. The mission of the Santa Barbara Public Library Foundation is to support the Santa Barbara Public Library by funding large-scale initiatives, and the current conditions in the plaza are limiting our support. The foundation and our board members want to bring visibility to our public library and help our entire community understand how valuable our public library is to Santa Barbara. Our library can be a 21st century library, and doesn't our Santa Barbara community deserve a 21st century library? Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is a question. Go ahead, Councilmember Nikas.
Hi.
Thank you for your presentation and also for all the great work you're doing. What's the status? Someone mentioned the Children's Endowment for the Children's Library. Is that an ongoing program?
It is an ongoing program, and we are continuing to receive funds, especially in our annual appeal for the endowment. And while we move into the Plaza project, the endowment may not be our priority to fundraise for. It still will be consistently collecting funds to support the much-needed programming and all of the great things that are happening in the Children's Library.
And what's the status of the Plaza fundraising?
We are waiting to start. As we have everyone ready at the gates to go and start talking to people and getting everyone excited about it, but the plans and the budget are really necessary to start strategically planning how we pursue donors.
So you don't have a kickoff date, or is that going to be this year?
I'm hoping. I'm really hoping that the plans move forward and that HLC goes smoothly, and just the steps that need to be taken for the plans to meet the needs of the library and the requests of our team. Yeah. So.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem and Councilman Dominguez. So we're working on a final design. You authorized the funds and the consultant for that. They're taking, a final kind of fresh look, and as Ms. Caliente showed you, there was a water feature that may no longer be appropriate. So is there a way to replace that in a way that makes the plaza really helpful and useful, but ultimately it's going to require HLC approval as well. And so I think they're rightly kind of waiting to see how that process plays out. We can then get a good final cost estimate, and then the fundraising effort can kick in.
Okay, great. And as a liaison to HLC, I'm happy to give them a little nudge, but if there's anything I can do or any of the council can do, please let us know. We're really eager for this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Milt Hess.
Mayor Pro Tem Friedman, members of City Council, good afternoon. My name is Milt Hess, and I'm here today in my role as Vice Chair of the City's Library Board. I know this is a budget hearing where the discussion focuses on cost, but happily, the other side of the discussion has gotten equal weight, I think, and that is the benefit, the value received from the funds expended. Director Caliente has described all the terrific contributions that the library is making to our city, and I hope you'll agree that the budget is a sound investment in the quality of life for our residents. During Jessica's tenure, the library's programming has expanded beyond anyone's expectations, except perhaps hers. But think of the library's offerings in two dimensions. One dimension is the collection. The other dimension is the programming. And those two dimensions have expanded dramatically, as you heard, the collection and the programming. So where do we go from here? And I propose that a third dimension for adding value to our city would be geographical expansion to the west side and farther into the future to the upper State Street area. When Mayor Murillo was City Council's liaison with the Library Board, on several occasions we discussed the idea of a West Side branch as a complement to the East Side branch. In retrospect, those discussions were probably premature, but I don't think that's the case any longer. I think that the offerings of the library are such that if we are looking ahead to, well, what do we do next? I propose that geographical expansion is going to happen at some point in the future, so let's start thinking about it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hess. Next up, and our final speaker is Daryl Sheck.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem Friedman and Council. I'm Daryl Sheck, Field Rep for SEIU Local 620. Just 3 points I wanted to make today. One, I just noticed that the library budget had a 1.7% budget line item for increases in salaries and benefits. Just a reminder, CPI for Los Angeles area last year was 3.8%. This small increase could cause your valued library employees potentially to fall farther behind, and we certainly don't want to see that. Point number two, A few of our library members are possibly transitioning from working for the city of Santa Barbara to potentially working for under the auspices of the city of Goleta. We appreciate the continued city flexibility in aiding this transition since we represent employees in both Santa Barbara and Goleta. And with regards to security, this is point number 3, there seems to be a theme here. Last week, the parks indicated they had some security concerns, and now the library seems to have similar concerns. I just wanted to make the point that Santa Maria Library does not rely exclusively on private security. In fact, the city of Santa Maria employs city rangers that patrol parks and the library, and they're employees of the city. I believe that this city ranger program has been very successful, and encourage you to look into that and consider that particular option when looking for security solutions at not only the library but citywide. And we appreciate the city library and support the library and, of course, those that work there in a very challenging environment. Thank you for letting me talk.
Well, thank you. I will close public comment now and turn it over to my colleagues if you have questions or comments. And Councilwoman Sneddon, your light's on first.
Thank you. I have a question about the staging for the museum and that August deadline, but are we in agreement that that's when that space will be cleared, or that's just when that agreement?
Mayor Pro Tem Friedman, Councilmember Sneddon, at this point, the agreement is from August 2018 to August 2019, and then it does revert to a month-to-month. So there's no deadline that they will leave in August unless we give the museum that notification.
And is there any update on their timeline?
At this point, what I'm hearing is 2020.
Okay. Thank you. And then it's phenomenal what you've done with the library. And I know I've shared this before, but 30 years ago, more, I spent every day after school, high school, in the library, just doing my homework till 5, 6 o'clock, a quiet place. And there were a lot of people who were apparently homeless reading in the library and spending time there as well. And I don't think it was at the level where it is now of these incidents, regardless of home status, where you're having to sort of protect your staff and protect yourself. And I really support whatever we need to do to have those libraries be safe places for everyone, especially and including staff and children and everyone, the elderly. It needs to be a place, it's a haven where anybody can go at any time. The programming that you've brought is just phenomenal to be a desirable place to be for young, for old, I could not believe when my teen chose to go to a Smash tournament, and I just thought, wow, you really know what you're doing, that you have such broad appeal to everyone, and it's an exciting place, and you hear about things that are going on there, and people want to go and be a part of it. So not just like the fun and exciting programming, but also the really basic taking care of people, homework, literacy, adult literacy, early literacy, bilingual, just those daily grind kind of efforts to really improve our community. And I share Councilmember, I'm sorry, I know Harmon, sorry. I was going to say Hart because that's how it, appreciation for the elimination of those fines. That is, they have a cap on them, but we've all had our kids come home and they've gotten a shiny new library card from school when they went on the field trip, and then $60 later fine for a book that was I know the book too. It was a paperback Clifford book, and I thought, geez, it makes it difficult. So that makes it accessible to everyone. That you can really make it a neighborhood part, and just the highlights of the programs that you're not just doing now but in the future are just really applaud the use of that space. And as your also the Friends communication plan, getting those groups together, which we asked last time and successfully begun that, I think is really valuable for everyone. And just as you're looking to update the upstairs space for the teens moving out, I still love the classic parts of the library too. It's very modern and it's an exciting place to be, but it's sort of it has such a historic feel too, especially near the fireplace and the upstairs rooms and the big tables. And it's such a beautiful place, and just I just really commend you for making it a place that's still relevant and a place we all want to continue to go. So thank you.
Councilman Dominguez.
Thank you. So I want to also start with generally praising the library and the increase in services. I frequent the library. I'm in my 10th year of teaching. I've done K through 12 in college, so it's great to go in there. I feel inspired every time I go in there. I check out books, I check out CDs and DVDs, I use Overdrive. So it really is exciting for me that the services have increased. The Eastside Library, another place where I've just seen great ramp-ups in use by the local patrons and increase in satisfaction. So these are great things. One question I did have is, you mentioned there would be a reduction in hourlies. Will any reduction of services follow that, or were you able to consolidate some things, or what's the impact of that?
Councilmember Dominguez, so one of the things I discussed was the automated materials handling. We are hoping that will create some efficiencies to allow us to reduce the number of people that we need to do the shipment piece. And then with an hourly budget, you always have ebbs and flows. It's kind of a revolving door of personnel, and so we hope that we can maintain the same level of services because we always do see salary savings in the hourly budget. So we're hoping to watch that and mitigate anything with just compacting.
And I guess a corollary of that is if there's any way we can convert any of these hourlies, if we've seen there's a steady need for those services, if we can convert those into full-time positions and benefits, that would be great too. They do provide more efficiencies, I think, in the long term. The thing that makes me almost as excited as the increase in services is you're tinkering with P3s and looking at your strategic goals and how do we provide more, how do we change our goals. I love it when at budget time departments come in having taken a good look at their goals. So I appreciate that. So one of the ones I had questions about was the homework help enhancement. So does that actually, I know in the slideshow as part of the measuring in P3s, but does that show up in the actual P3s in the budget book?
Councilmember Dominguez,
maybe a different name?
Does. It is under the Central Library Program on page G199 under Project Objectives for fiscal year 2020. It is the last one. Launched the one-on-one volunteer-based literacy tutoring for youth with dyslexia using Orton Gillingham training and curriculum.
Okay. And so is there a numeric goal or benchmark for that program?
Councilmember Dominguez, at this point, not within our P3s, our goal is to launch the program and then begin the assessment and analytics. One thing the library is really good at is curating statistics.
Okay, that's great. And I think that's all I had. Keep doing the great work. Very appreciated.
Any other comments? If not, then I'll provide some comments. First, I'm going to start with a quote because this is my first time running a meeting and it's libraries, and I started way back in the day, and I see Councilman Rouse groaning over there. But you knew I wasn't going to let you down, Randy. So my family and I had the opportunity to go see Neil Gaiman, a celebrated author at UCSB Arts and Lectures on Saturday night. And he is a big proponent of libraries, and he has said libraries really are the gates to the future. And I think with everything we've seen today, we are moving forward, and there's so much, the work is extraordinary. And I want to thank our staff, I want to thank our library board, and our Library Foundation, as well as members of the public who came here to speak today. I'm pleased with all that we're doing, the arts and culture, the tiny libraries. I think you're going to improve our batting average when we're talking about tiny homes and tiny libraries to 1 for 2. And the science and veterans and adult literacy, just everything you're doing is really outstanding. And I, too, am really pleased that the direction that last year about coordinating with the various groups and having those discussions took place. So I want to commend all who participated in that. I share the security concerns and just the amount of staff time that's out there. So I am interested to see the proposals that come back. I appreciate Mr. Scheck raising the issue of the park rangers. That's an idea I hadn't heard before. But it is, if there is an ability to have park rangers, if you bring out some information with that as part of that. And then, but I think that was it. And also, Councilmember Dominguez had talked about it earlier, the Adelante Charter School. We do have a joint school board meeting on Thursday, so we'll have the ability to raise that with the school board. Just raise it to the attention that it came up during our budget hearings, because that is a large chunk of that budget, 30%. I didn't realize it was quite that high. And I think that is all I have, and I really appreciate all the work you've done, and go Libraries. All right, so with that, we will move on. Any further comments? We'll move on to our next item, which is community development. Whenever you're ready, Mr. Buell.
Yes, Mayor Pro Tem Friedman, members of the council, I'm George Buell, Community Development Director, and it's our pleasure to present to you our proposed budget for the upcoming fiscal year 2020. As part of this, you will receive a summary and findings of a fee study that we've been undergoing over the course of the past year. This has been a major undertaking of the department, in addition to other departments that participate in the land development team process, those being Public Works, Creeks, Fire in particular. And so without further ado, I'll go ahead and turn this over to Sue Gray, who is our business manager. And I would also like to recognize the hard work throughout the course of preparing this budget, and especially the fee study, with others in the room. And so with us today are supervisors and managers from throughout the Community Development Department. A lot of really hard and good work went into the reports that you're going to hear, and we look forward to the presentation and hearing from you afterward. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, council members, Sue Gray, Community Development Business Manager. Today we are, like George said, going through our department presentation. We'll start with an overall department overview, then get into the general fund, and that's where we'll talk about the fee study. Then we'll touch on the Redevelopment Agency Retirement Obligation Fund, Affordable Housing Fund, and the Home and Community Development Block Grant Funds. This is an organizational chart for the entire department. We have 10 programs in 3 divisions, plus our administration. So we have 4 programs in planning, 3 in housing and human services, and 3 in building and safety. There are 5 funds and a total of 77.35 full-time equivalents. This chart shows our land development and construction indicators. As you can see, development activity continues to be strong. We keep thinking that activity will slow down, but it hasn't yet. Mr. Buell likes to say that we're in the 10th year of a 7-year cycle. The top line shows the total building permit applications received from fiscal year 11 through to proposed fiscal year 20. The middle line are the number of building inspections by a factor of 10. So for proposed fiscal year 20, we're estimating 14,300 building inspections per year. And the bottom line are the total design review applications received. This chart shows the planning and building and safety development revenues. In fiscal year 2019, we budgeted just over $6 million. We're projecting to come in at $5.9 million, we're projecting to come in around $160,000 lower than we had originally budgeted. Building and safety revenues are projected to end the year on target. However, the planning revenues have been down all year long. The number of applications that have come through for planning, as you saw on the previous slide, have been steady. However, the projects are less complex and so bringing in less revenue. And we've seen fewer AUD projects in at least the latter half of the year. These are the proposed staffing changes that are included in the proposed budget for fiscal year 2020. The first is a reclassification of an administrative specialist to an administrative assistant. It's in the administration division, which is my division. However, this position is primarily budgeted in affordable housing and will primarily do work for affordable housing. And we found over the years that we need someone with a higher level of skills and expertise to help out in affordable housing. Building and Safety is requesting 2 new positions. The first one is an administrative specialist that's needed to provide some admin support to the Building and Safety Division. This will free up higher paid staff to provide customer service. This position is funded 77% by fees and 23% from the general fund. A new building permit technician, which we are proposing to change the name of all of our building inspector aides to a building permit technician. This position will provide additional building permit counter and plan check services, which are needed to help the division implement their new building permit facilitation model. This is where all commercial and residential permit applications, it's a model to reduce the number of rounds of plan review for all residential and commercial plans. And this position is 100% funded by fees. In the planning division, we are requesting a reclassification of a project planner to an admin analyst 2. This position would develop new and or update policies and procedures and develop some training. That division, planning division, has seen a 30% staff turnover in the last couple of years, which is pretty high. Several of those were due to retirements from long-term employees, so that we've lost a lot of institutional knowledge in recent years. So the training and the policies and procedures are intended to help with that. This position will also do some special project facilitation and monitor ongoing housing legislation. And the next line, reductions. The proposed budget in front of you in planning shows a reduction of $82,000 in our hourly staff, and that was to balance our budget with the decrease in revenues. And this slide is just a summary of the total budget by fund for the entire department. Our department is $16.9 million. The majority, 75%, is out of the general fund, and then the smaller amounts are from the Redevelopment Agency Obligation Retirement Fund, Affordable Housing, Community Development Block Grant, and Home Funds, which we'll get to the other funds at the end of the presentation. Now we'll move on to the general fund. This chart shows the appropriations of the the general fund by division. The largest is planning, 5.7 million, 45% of our general fund budget, followed by building and safety at 4.5 million, housing and human services at 1.3 million, and administration at just over 1 million. And here are our proposed general fund revenues. For this slide, we are comparing the fiscal year 19 projected revenues to the fiscal year 2020 recommended. As you can see, our largest line item are fees and charges. This, our revenue projection includes fee study adjusted fees for building and safety. So that means the fee study was completed and there were new fees to be full cost recovery, which building and safety is full cost recovery. We have included the revenues to go along with those adjusted fees in here. However, for planning, we've not included the revenues for their adjusted fees per the fee study. The planning division has historically been heavily subsidized by the general fund. So for the actual fiscal year 2020 budget that you have before you today, we have not factored in any of the additional fees that could be collected, but we'll be talking about that later in the presentation. The intergovernmental fees are projected to go down a little bit. That's mostly, we receive state accessibility fees on our building permits, and that's just a small difference between what we expect to get this year and what we budget. Internal charges have gone up a little bit, and that's due to an increase in our overhead revenue credit for fiscal year 20. And the other fees, that's primarily our administrative citation fees that we receive when there's been a citation given. And we have brought in more money than we budget. And we try to budget conservatively for that because we don't really count on that money to balance our budgets. We prefer that people actually take care of their citations instead of paying fees. This slide shows our general fund proposed expenditures, and for this one we are comparing our fiscal year 2019 amended budget to the 2020 recommended budget. We're showing a slight increase in salaries and benefits, and that is due to salary and CalPERS increases, as well as the addition of the 2 new positions in building and safety. The allocated costs have gone up. I checked with finance and they said that was due to an increase in our liability insurance, and it's related to the vehicles that we own. We don't own, but we have vehicles in building inspection, and they go out. They don't use the carpool vehicles. Supplies and services, it looks like it's going down a lot, but it's not really. It's due to the fiscal year 2019 amended budget includes fiscal year 18 carryovers. And this year we came back to council, I believe, once or twice to add some professional service agreements for plan check and inspection services. So really it's the fiscal year 19 budget that looks higher than it really should be, or it was budgeted for originally. For special projects, again, it's the difference between the amended. You may recall that you allocated another $15,000 to the Freedom Warming Centers. That's shown in the fiscal year 2019 amended budget, but we don't budget for it in 2020. And again, there was some fiscal year 18 carryovers that are inflating that line item for 2019 as well. And the small increase in the equipment line item is for software that we will need for online plan check services. So now we will get into the land development team fee study. Our prior study.
Councilman Sutton has a question.
Sure.
Thank you. So I'm remembering from last year that when we asked how many full-time equivalent people would be needed for certain areas, was it 2.5 or 1.5? And then can you just summarize for me in here, because it sounds like you had a reduction of 1.5 to balance the budget, but then another area increased a certain number. So if you could just like sort of link me through those FTEs, where they went, where they are.
Are you talking about?
I guess all of these slides in total, just the FTE, as you said, there's a reduction of 1.5 to balance the budget. And then there was
the 1.5 reduction was in hourly salaries. So you wouldn't see that on the total. It's
so just conceptually. I mean, I'm just not tracking decimals, but tracking. Conceptually, are we have additional people to help with the streamlining, or we're down people?
We have additional people. I believe we had 2 positions last year that were added, and we're requesting 2 more positions this year.
Okay, I think that's the summary I needed. So we have a net 2 new positions now, and then asking for. I won't get ahead of myself. But so at this point, before an additional ask, there have been 2 that were added.
Yes.
Yes.
And what department?
Pardon me?
What department are they in? Are they
in the planning division?
In the planning division.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Sneddon, just to be very clear, what you see here on this slide outlines what we're asking for in the various divisions. So it's not just in planning, but with respect to I remember the questions that you were asking in our last budget hearing, and we were talking primarily about planning, but also about building. So just to be clear, we're looking for the reclassification in admin, and then on the building side, we're asking for a couple of new positions in order to keep up with the work. On the planning side, Sue, if you would advance the, here, I got it. Yep.
Now you missed.
I got it.
Okay.
And on the planning side, we're looking for a reclassification. Now, there is a reduction here. This is hourly staff that we bring in to help where most needed. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a spoiler alert. As we get into the fee study, we are identifying potential to bring in additional money, and there is a request to make this particular reduction whole. So,
I don't know. What do you mean by particular reduction whole?
Right here, we're proposing a reduction of $82,000, and we've been using that money to bring in hourly staff in the planning division. That's in order to balance the budget. As you will recall, Ms. Gray described that the budget that's before you today we did not want to assume that you would do anything with our revenue. And so based on your input today, there may be opportunity to bring additional funds into the general fund. And if that is the case, then we have some suggestions as to what you might consider doing with respect to our department and making this particular reduction of 1.5 FTE or $82,000. We're recommending that you consider making this particular reduction whole.
Sorry, I don't know what making it whole means. Does that mean being
restore the funding? So we're
okay.
recommending a reduction based on an anticipated reduction in fees based on the existing fee structure today. Next, you're going to hear about the fee study that's coming up that will identify significant potential for increased revenue into the general fund.
Okay, thank you. So it means to cover that cost.
To cover that cost.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, back to the fee study. Our prior land development team fee study was completed in 2004. We were long overdue for a new study. We hired a consultant in August of 2018, and he worked with our staff on cost determinations and identified the total cost to provide each service that's involved in our land development team. On March 26th, we took the recommendations to the Finance Committee, and they forwarded it to full council with full cost recovery with some exceptions. And I also want to say that we held an open house. We've sent out, we unfortunately had only one person show up for the open house. We sent out 3 land development team bulletins, a list of 430 individuals on that. We reached out to the AIA and the Santa Barbara Contractors Association, and we offered to meet with them, and we did not hear back from them. And again, it went to Finance Committee, and we have surprisingly had very few comments. So that could be good. We'll see. And with that, I would like to turn it over to Eric Johnson. He's the president of Revenue and Cost Specialists, and he's going to go over the results of the fee study.
In stereo. Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, members of the council. It's good to be before you this afternoon to talk about the cost of services fee study for the land development team. Before we get into that, I just want to give you a little background on myself and my company. Revenue Cost Specialists was founded in the wake of the passage of Proposition 13 by 2 former city managers and finance director, where they realized that cities were going to need to be able to keep track of their cost a lot more than they did before Proposition 13 and be able to match that up with revenues. And so they saw that come in and really pioneered the concept of public agencies matching up revenues with cost. And so I myself have been doing this since 1990, worked in over 100 different agencies in 3 states myself, and so still doing this for fun. All right, so what did we do? We really recast the city budget as if it were a business. Governmental accounting does a great job of telling you how much departments cost and how much money you're spending exactly on various different functions, but it doesn't do a very good job of telling you how much it costs to provide services to your customers, like a business would. Just like when you go to the store and you buy a can of corn, you know when you buy that can of corn that you're paying for the farmer, the transportation, the checker in front of you, and a whole host of other things. You know that. We did that same process here. We identified what is the cost, the direct cost of providing that service to the customer, what are the overhead costs. You will not see a city council service in here, you will not see a finance service, but you're part of the cost because you're part of the support for all the employees within the city, as is HR and city clerk and the departmental administration. That's all bundled in, and we've created fully burdened hourly rates. So when we say this is what it costs to provide services to your customers, that's that fully burdened cost from start to finish. And so if you don't do that as a business, you're not going to stay in business very long. If you don't know what it costs to provide services to your customer, you won't be around very long. And also, we matched up those costs with the revenues that are associated with that. And again, if you're not doing that as a business, you're not going to be around very long. So it's really taking that business model and putting it over, laying it over on top of the governmental model. So how do we do it? It really comes down to sitting down with staff and going through, identifying what are the services you're providing, going through the very complex fee schedule that the city currently has, breaking out all the individual steps. So we had multiple meetings with staff, and when I say multiple meetings, I mean we did this for 4, 5, 6 months, where every week or two we'd be out and breaking down the steps of this particular service. Who's involved? What are the steps involved? How much time is involved? How many of these do you do? And went over that and over that and over that for everything you do. Because as you may or may not know, Santa Barbara is a little complex. And there was processes that I hadn't seen in other cities, especially in the design review process. You guys don't have a design review process, you have a design review process. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing. You drive around the city and you could tell it looks nice, it feels nice. And so there's an outcome from that, but there's also a cost to that. And so we identified what that cost was. And like I said, it took a while to go through that and identify all those steps with all the departments and get to a point where staff felt comfortable with that also, because this is something they do every day, but they don't, of course, think about how much time it takes to do it. So we have to go through that process, and staff was fantastic with that in allowing the time to do this process right. We then took that those costs. On the cost side, we identified what are the salaries, what are people's actual salaries, what are the fringe benefits, what are the operating expenses within the various different divisions. We use, for the overhead cost, we use the city calculated cost allocation plan, which allocates out the general city administrative cost as well as the departmental cost. But we also identified division overhead costs, where within the division there's administrative support or supervision, and sometimes even a subsection below that. So we wanted to make sure we're capturing 100% of the cost of everyone within the divisions that we're looking at. And that's what we did. So we developed that fully burdened hourly rate, salaries, benefits, operating expenses, overheads, just like you were a business. matched that up with the time, and now we know what it costs to provide that service. We then sat down with the divisions again and identified, here's the cost, here's the current fee, here's where we need to make changes to get that current fee up to 100% of the cost, or in some cases, lower to get it down to 100% of the cost, because of course you can't charge more than it costs to provide the service. So there are many fees in here, especially on the planning side, where the fee's going down. There are many more where it's going up, but it was that process where we went through, we looked at the time, we took an honest look at the time, and wherever that cost came out is where that cost came out. We also looked at, when we looked at all the services provided, there are many services within development services that are what we call tax-supported services, services that is not a fee for, advanced planning, long-range planning, code enforcement, where it's fine-related, but it's primarily tax-supported. And those are not part of the fees, but we need to identify that, because to the extent that these are the things that only taxes can pay for. And of course, we identified the personal choice services, the fee services, those things that the customer is identifiable. A fee can be charged, benefits a specific individual or group. So most of the development services department fits within that, or certainly the planning and building and safety areas fit within that, where it's benefiting a specific individual or group. Now, I'm kind of a picture guy myself, and so another way to look at the same thing is taxes and grants. In California local government, there's basically taxes and grants and fees. There's not a whole lot of pots of revenue that you guys have to draw from, as you well know. Taxes and grants are meant to support community-supported services, things like police, fire, streets, parks, long-range planning. Fees are meant to support personal choice services. To the extent that the fees are not high enough to cover the cost of those personal choice services, taxes are paying for it. That's the only place it can come from. So these services are occurring. The costs are happening. It's just a question of who's going to pay for it. We identified about a $2 million annual subsidy. And we're asking you at the end of the day to make that policy call. We have recommendations in here. Staff's going to have some other recommendations. But we're saying the costs are occurring, who's going to pay for them, and that's up to the City Council at the end of the day. So before I turn it over to divisional staff to get into more detail, are there any questions on?
Any questions from my colleagues for Mr. Johnson? Seeing Councilman Sen.
Is built into the fee structure efficiency? Like if something takes 2 years to get through the process versus a recommended amount of time to get through the process, are these fees based on an ideal situation or our current length of time of service?
It's definitely based on what is a typical application. So we don't want to look at what's perfect. We don't want to look at what's horrible, but what is a typical amount of time spent. Now, the calendar time may be very different than the processing time. That processing time, let's say, is 20 hours, but that may occur over a couple of months. And so the calendar time process doesn't really factor into this process, and it also doesn't factor into, you could be doing it this way or you could be doing it this way. We just wanted to know how much time does it take to do it today for a typical application that comes in.
Does it cost more if it calendars out longer? Like if it stops and starts and coming back to it, does that go into the fee structure?
To some degree. There's certainly some loss by staff when they have to pick something up again and get familiar with it again. I wouldn't say it's significant, but there definitely is some loss, some effort there.
So these are based on typical Santa Barbara applications and permitting times.
Right.
Thank you.
Every city does things differently. And so every city has a conditional use permit, but they all define it differently. So I can't come in and say, well, this city's CUP takes this much time. But as we're going through the steps, a certain step should take a relatively stable amount of time from city to city. And so if it's outside of that, I'll ask those questions. Why does it take that much more time, or why does it not take enough time? So as we're going through the individual steps.
Thank you.
All right. No further lights are on, so we'll. Who's up next?
Then I'll turn it over to Andrew.
We haven't gone over the slide yet. Are you going to go over the slide?
Well, I did forget a slide here at the end. This is the full cost recovery. We're showing the current revenues based on the current fees, the cost as we define them through this process, and then the profit or subsidy, the negative numbers being the subsidy. So we're showing all of them being subsidized, and there's the $2 million or about 79% cost recovery. And then the possible new revenue, in most cases, in all the cases on this slide, to recover 100% of the cost. The negative number in building safety was really me being more conservative, where we have some reductions in the records management and the cashier surcharges, but the building safety fees themselves were projecting zero new revenue. We could have, if I were a little more aggressive, I could have projected up to $400,000 to capture what was the subsidy for that particular service. But again, I was just trying to be more conservative, and so I projected zero. Any questions on that?
No lights are on, so I'll turn it over to Mr. Stuffler.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. I'm Andrew Stuffler. I'm the building official. Let me take you through the Building and Safety Division's results of the fee study. This first slide just kind of reacquaints everyone with the services that we provide in building and safety. We can go to the next slide. Oh, I have the clicker. I can go to the next slide. Okay, so what you're going to see in the fee study relative to the building and safety fees are decreases in the commercial and tenant improvement building permits. When we looked at our time, it's been many years, 15 years, since we've done a time study to look at how much time we spend on each type of application. So we're going to see decreases in those fees because we spend less time on that than the fees from the last 15 years of making incremental 2%, 3% increases each year reflected. On the converse, the residential applications, these residential, I'm talking about single family homes and duplexes, not multifamily, they take more time because oftentimes we don't have the same level of expertise in preparation of the plans or construction. Owner builders, contractors that work with maybe a little lower skill set because they're doing single family homes. That's kind of an entry into construction usually as opposed to multifamily or commercial. They take more time. So we'll see increases in those fees. That's how the time study, the fee study showed our time being spent. We also used to charge, we would look at the building permit fee and we would charge 50% when someone came in and gave us their plans, and that's what we figured was the plan check cost, 50%. We don't do that anymore. The way Eric went through, we're proposing not to do that anymore. The way Eric went through this, he actually broke out the plan check time and the inspection time so we can have a more accurate plan check fee and inspection fee for the permit. Just in case you hear from, if this goes through and you hear from constituents that my plan check fee went way up, their overall permit fee may not have, but they may have paid more in plan check because we estimate that we use more hours on those applications for plan check than we do for inspection. It's not really a 50-50 time split. Now, when Eric asks us how much time does it take, how much time should it take, we honor the average submittal under the average complexity. So if we have someone submit to us a very poor set of plans, it will take, as you often hear, right, 4, 5, 6 rounds of plan check. Well, once you get beyond 3 rounds of plan check, there'll be additional charges for those services because it really shouldn't. We give adequate information in the first round of plan check for people to be successful in the second and third rounds. If they want to argue and they want to try being creative and propose different designs in their plan check as they make their corrections, then that can generate new comments because that's new design that we hadn't reviewed yet. So part of that, answering Eric's question of how long should it take, results in us saying it really shouldn't take more than 3 rounds of plan check. And you'll see this in our P3s for our proposed P3s for fiscal year 20. We are trying to reduce the number of rounds of plan check that we have to do. So we're looking at ways that we can help the applicant be successful without having to go into 4 and 5 rounds of plan check. But that's what the extra charges for additional service refers to. So the fees, as they're proposed today in the fee resolution, include all the adjustments that Eric proposed based on his fee study. And for building and safety, a 2% increase, which is similar to what we have done in prior years. to cover costs. That's a general fee adjustment. Eric didn't have that information when he started, so we added it in towards the end. And this is different, I believe, than planning. I believe planning did not do that. So, so you'll see in general an increase in 2% from what Eric proposed. And that's with the exception of these three types of permits, which we see as community benefit permits, and we try not to raise the price. We actually artificially lower those prices of those permits because they're for festivals and community events, and they're pretty limited in the number, so it's not a very large impact on our budget. If you look at, if I could draw your attention to Appendix C, page 8, you can see an example. Let me see if I can get to Appendix C, page 8. About middle of the page, you'll see that doors, new door, non-structural, and structural are stricken from the fee schedule. It should look like this. There's a lot of attachments, but it's in the back. Yes, it's in that attachment. This is an example of where we consolidated. So you'll see some fees stricken from the fee schedule, the fee resolution, and but they're actually included somewhere else, like in an alteration. We had broken them out, and then we looked at how many times we used that fee, and we weren't using it. So we thought, why have fees in a fee resolution that we don't use? So you'll see examples of that and you should see an explanation under the proposed fee why we don't have that there anymore if we struck that fee out. Then we added some new fees. You'll see those. I believe those were they in red text or underscored, Sue? I don't recall how we did the new ones. We didn't have very many that were new. I'll look for those and I'll bring those to your attention later. And we reorganized the tables and the fees to try to make them more user-friendly, because there's a lot of fees in here and it's difficult to go through. And with that, I will turn it over to Renee with the clicker.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. I'll cover briefly a summary of our planning division fees as a result of the LDT fee study. As Eric mentioned, there's 4 sections in the planning division. 3 of them up on the screen are those sections where we charge fees for services. So what's not up there is long range and special studies. Staff in those sections are subsidized almost entirely by the general fund, unless we find grant funding or some other source of funding outside of the general fund. So we charge service fees, we charge fees for services in development and environmental review, design review, and in zoning and enforcement services. As Eric mentioned, most of the fees in planning are significantly below full cost. There are some that would actually be going down as a result of the fee study, but most of them will be going up, and there'll be a lot of adjustments and consolidation that I'll touch on in a moment, with the recommendation moving to full cost recovery for planning division services with some exceptions. And those exceptions are listed here. In particular, historic structures and sites reports are required for projects where we either through previous surveys or through information learned through the project application, we believe that the structure of the site may have some historic value, historic integrity, and may or may not be worthy of being designated or in some way protected. We call for historic structures and site report to be prepared in order to do that analysis. And we believe the outcome of those reports and the recommendations provide a larger community benefit than to just the project applicant, because there's a lot of great information that comes out of those, and many times there'll be a recommendation to designate the structure a structure of merit or city landmark, and then that's a resource for the whole community to enjoy. So in that case, we'd recommend charging only 50% of the full cost to review and have those reports accepted by the Historic Landmarks Commission. There's a couple areas, voluntary applications, where we want to encourage participation. One is voluntary pre-application review. So there are some project application types that require a pre-application review, and so for those we would still recommend charging the full cost to provide that service. But if an applicant wants an early read on a particular project,
really to decide whether or not they should purchase a property or pursue a particular type of development. We want to encourage that early and relatively inexpensive investment in that information, and so continue to provide that at a relatively low cost. So we'd recommend 50% of the fee for that. The Mills Act program is a program that helps to preserve and restore historic properties in town, and when property owners enter into a Mills Act contract with the city, they promise to through property tax savings, they have a contract with the city to reinvest that savings into their property to restore it. We want to encourage people to apply to be in that program, and so we'd like to reduce the fee for that application. And then there's a couple areas where we want to minimize government constraint, and so we'd recommend less than full cost recovery. The first is a coastal development permit without a public hearing, and that really specifically refers to accessory dwelling units in the coastal zone. And that is because all of the state laws that you've seen amend accessory dwelling unit regulations have not been applicable in the coastal zone. And so we continue to have our still our current coastal review process. Some of those accessory dwelling units do require a coastal development permit, but they don't require a public hearing. But there is a lot more staff time going into those. So there is a fee we need to charge for those, but it would be way out of balance with an accessory dwelling unit being proposed in the inland part of the city. So we're proposing to try to equalize those a little by reducing the fee for accessory dwelling units in the coastal zone. Appeals. Over many years, Council has, as a policy decision, wanted to keep appeal fees low. When you look at the full cost to the city to process appeals to City Council, they can be upwards of $10,000. Obviously, that's not likely a fee that we would want to charge full cost recovery to either party in an appeal situation, so we'd recommend just a minor increase to those appeal fees to still kind of keep pace with the increased cost for staff to process those appeals, but still keep them well below full cost. And then the minor zoning exception for administrative review of a minor zoning exception is a little bit of an anomaly that we are left with because we have two different zoning ordinances. We have Title 28, which is still in effect in the coastal zone, and Title 30, which is in effect in the inland areas of the city. And so we process minor zoning exceptions slightly differently because we don't yet have our Title 30 certified in the coastal zone. And it turns out that it takes staff more time to actually review the minor zoning exceptions than it does the design review boards, which is how they're processed in the inland parts of the city. And we didn't feel it was fair to impose that additional time on the applicant just because we haven't caught up our zoning ordinances to be equalized in inland and coastal areas. So aside from those few areas where we'd recommend charging less than full cost recovery, there's also quite a few fees where the increase, the adjusted fee would be quite a bit higher, and so we'd recommend increasing those over a 3-year period. And the criteria we used to identify those was if the fee was going to increase by more than $2,500 and represent more than a 50% increase in fee. And so then we'd have a graduated increase over a 3-year period to not have the applicant bear that all at once. And then we're also, through Eric's discussions with us and how we currently charge what we call a land development team recovery fee, we'd recommend handling that differently. So our current process is for the more complex projects that go through our development application review team process, we charge a certain amount of planning fees up front. And they go through the planning review process, and then they might get their land use approval. And then once they come in to actually submit for a building permit, we charge them the remaining 30% of the fees that they didn't pay up front. And it's really meant to, towards the end of the process, recapture those fees for the staff time already spent.
But if we were moving towards full cost recovery and actually having applicants pay for the staff time at each step of the way through the project review, our fees recommended going forward would have that built in just 100% from the beginning, because the staff time is still spent whether or not they submit for a building permit. So that would be a change in how we collect those fees. And so again, like Andrew said earlier, the overall fee may seem significantly higher because it's paid all up front, but whereas through the normal course of business, they might have paid close to that through that two-step process of recapturing that extra 30% towards the end of the process. So our proposed fees for fiscal year 2020 do include our staff recommended adjustments as a result of the fee study, and they will, in short order, also include a 2% increase. When we did the fee study, we were using salaries that were in effect at the time, but did not take into account any salary and benefit adjustments for the upcoming year. So we do need to increase that by 2% in order to stay on par with being full cost recovery. With Eric's overall recommendations to become full cost recovery, and then our recommendations for those exceptions to that, we could see a potential revenue increase of about $800,000, which would significantly reduce the general fund subsidy for planning services. As we were going through our fees with Eric, we took any opportunity we could to simplify and consolidate our planning fees. So you may notice if you've gone through some of our design review fees, we'll have many different categories in there. For example, the size of a single-family home. There might be 4 or 5 different subcategories, and you pay a different fee if the house is larger, or if there's multiple units on a lot. Anywhere from a project that might be 1 to 80 units with 6 or 7 subcategories, with the fee going up. When we really took a look at the time we spend processing projects through the design review process in particular, we found those weren't necessarily the factors that required more of our time. Interestingly, it turned out that the lot size for single-family homes was actually more indicative of how long it would take us to do our plan review and have the design boards give their comments on it, where the smaller lots were sometimes they would struggle more with those because you'd be in a more urban setting, whereas some larger lots, it could be a very quick plan check for us. So we shifted how we charge fees for single-family projects, as well as with multifamily projects. We found we didn't need all those subcategories. We could collapse a lot of those and still represent that typical multifamily project in fewer fees. We also took an opportunity to clarify fees where we could. And then in terms of zoning plan check, we went with more of an a la carte setup going forward. We do assume that a project may have 2 rounds of plan checks. So the initial fee paid would account for the initial review and then a resubmittal. If there were aspects of the project that were abating violations and there was an enforcement case involved, then there's an additional fee on top of that. Or if the project had a lot of planning commission conditions where it took a lot of extra time to make sure that the project complied with all the conditions, then we would add an additional fee on top of that. So we're really trying to customize the fees that we're charging for projects instead of lumping one particular scope paying a fee, whereas it might not have these complexities added onto it. And then on some of our planning applications that we don't see very often, but they can be very long-term complex applications, like a general plan amendment or an annexation, we're recommending going towards a deposit and then having the applicant pay down the actual cost of the staff working on those application types, rather than making our best guesstimate of how much time a particular application like that may take. And then I'll turn it back over to Sue Gray.
Thank you. So this next slide is similar to the one that Mr. Johnson had up. as far as the possible new revenue. On his slide, it showed 1.6 million over in the very right-hand column. With the staff recommendations that you've just heard about, that number would go down to just over $1 million. So that's taking into account a lot of the planning fees that met the criteria to be increased over a 3-year period. That takes into account that adjusted revenue as well as the fees that staff is recommending at less than full cost recovery. And you can see some of it is in engineering and transportation, and they will be talking to you about their fees at their budget meeting. These are the recommended customer service enhancements that we are proposing to use with some of the general fund savings. The first is, as Mr. Buell said earlier, to bring back some of the hourly zoning enforcement. Not the whole $82,000, but $60,625, which would, it makes it so that we have what we've normally had for zoning enforcement. I think in fiscal year 2019 we had some carryover that made that down to up to $82,000. The next thing would be for information technology support for the Excella business process. Excella is up and live. It's still taking a whole lot of staff time to get it up and working at the same level that Tidemark was working. So we need to allow staff to return to their normal duties as of July 1st. And to do that, we feel like we need some contract services for 6 months to help with the continued rollout of that program. And then evaluate in 6 months to determine if there's a need for information technology support long term. And the last thing is a workflow and organizational study. We're estimating
I'm going
that.
to stop you. Councilmember Dominguez has a question.
Can you tell us more about the IT support? So this is $150,000 for a 6-month period. I'm sorry, I didn't 100% follow.
6 months.
And where does that money go?
Mayor Pro Tem Friedman, Councilmember Dominguez, rolling out the Excella software, we have contracted with both Excella and another subcontractor that came alongside staff to help with the technical aspects of the rollout.
Who's the other subcontractor?
Silver Lining Solutions. And this is a proposal to pay for Silver Linings to come along to help us get through a 6-month period while we evaluate what the needs will be on the IT side on an ongoing basis. They will be directly involved helping my staff reporting through information technology.
So I have to say this is news to me, and this has been a frustrating process to watch because of how long it's taken to roll this out, because of the impact it's had on the department, the impact it probably has had on morale. And then to see this line item is really disappointing. So I'd like to know more about this. I'd like to hear more detail on what's gone wrong. I asked at our joint planning commission and city council meeting, almost was it a year ago, why this was taking so long, and I didn't get a satisfactory answer then, and I'm not satisfied with what I've heard so far yet today. So please tell me something that will go further towards satisfying me.
Mayor Pro Tem Friedman, Councilmember Dominguez, we're not satisfied either. We're disappointed with how this project rolled out, how long it took, how staff intensive it was. One of the reasons for putting this recommendation forward is to get staff out of the loop so that they can get back doing their day job and help support the process of being more customer friendly and processing applications sooner. What we've realized through this, and you're going to see it with the upcoming Kronos project as well, is we think a better business plan going forward is to hire a city representative to be our check on the main consultant that we're hiring, rather than relying on existing city staff who may not be as sophisticated and know how to manage a project as effectively as bringing in a project manager. So this is essentially bringing in a project manager to free up city staff to close this project out, working with Acela to make sure we get a project that works for us. And I agree with you that we have not been satisfied with how that's worked. And so that's why we're looking at a new and different approach.
And the questions I had a year ago were, was there something wrong with the software? I know Acela is a nationwide provider. They attend all of the city conferences and are working for dozens, if not hundreds of cities. So was it something wrong with the software? And I know part of the contract with them was to provide some type of service in implementing the software. Was it something wrong with the contract? And I'm asking these pointed questions now because I want to make sure we don't repeat this in the future. And having a city rep seems like it may be one step in the right direction, but I really want to know what went wrong. And I have personal experience rolling out software as a lawyer, and I know there's probably some similarities when you're rolling out software to non-IT people. And I know there's difficulties, but on Acela's website, there's a plan on how to roll it out in a matter of weeks, and yet we've been working on this for, I want to say, 4 years. Maybe that was just when the contract was started, but this is, 10 to maybe even 100 times longer than it should have been in a best case scenario. So this is way worse than a worst case scenario. So I want to have answers to the best you can provide them.
I will attempt to provide some of those answers. I will also invite Mr. Stuffler, Ms. Brooke, to also provide insight from their perspectives. Just as for the benefit of the balance of the council, this is software that's shared among multiple departments. It, in my estimation, turned out obviously to be much more complex than what we had anticipated at the beginning of the project. With respect to Acela's claims that there is a possibility of rolling out this software in a matter of weeks, I would need to see what it is that they're purporting could be rolled out in that period of time, because I can tell you, with the number of staff resources that we have put into this project, that just is not the case for what we have. It is very sophisticated software. And so think of it in terms of other software perhaps that you use on your computer, or if it's a very sophisticated automobile. Sometimes I've used the analogy of aircraft. I'm not a pilot, but I understand that certain aircraft are much more difficult to operate than the more simple models. And Acela is at the top end of complexity. And as a result, we've had to deal with many, many unanticipated issues, ranging from how to workflow process and how to get the software to communicate with things like cashiering and across the IT network. Now, that being the case, perhaps closer to the work itself, I'll let Mr. Stuffler start off, and if Ms. Brooks has anything to provide, she can do that.
Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Dominguez. So the project management was... Well, we didn't do a very good job. We overestimated our abilities because we had 30 years of practice with a simpler software that we had mastered, and we were very confident with that software. And we walked into this, and after we walked into it and learned more each quarter, each year, we realized we were in over our head, and it was going to take a lot of work for us to complete the project and survive it. And so we stuck with it, and we did. And we rolled out the bare bones that we needed to roll out to keep IT functioning so they could do other projects. And now we have cleanup that we have to do. And the decision is, from my perspective, from a resource allocation perspective, is do I use my staff for that and backfill, or do I contract that service out to experts and let my staff play their strengths of doing construction inspection and plan check and supervision in those areas? And in my opinion, we're better off allowing our staff to play their strengths and get them out of the role of being software technicians. And that's how we ultimately result to an undesirable outcome. But we do have an option, and we have a way of funding the option, and to bring closure to this and have a system that doesn't take twice as long as our other system that we had in place. And I'm sure you're hearing about it from your constituents, because as the building official, I hear about it on a daily basis. And I'm very concerned. This is a reduction in customer service that we need to take care of.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mr. Casey.
Why don't you finish the third item and then I'll chime in.
Okay, the third item would be a one-time request for a workflow and organizational study. And I think going through the fee study exercise, we have found that there are some areas where we could streamline, be a little better. So this would be for a consultant to identify opportunities for increased efficiency, customer service, and communication. And it would help us implement best management practices within both the building and the planning divisions.
So Mayor Pro Tem Friedman, I just want to summarize a little bit about the fee study and also that last item. That last item, I'll be honest, is one that I'm very interested in, bringing in a third-party outside kind of organizational development, management audit type person to look at our planning and building processes. You all are hearing it on a daily basis. We're all hearing it on a daily basis. And I think bringing in a fresh set of eyes to just work internally with staff to see if there isn't a more efficient, better way that we can be working on the land development side of things. The timing's right, and we've got a funding source to do this. Mr. Buell will be here tomorrow with a number of recommendations that have come out of the task force that he's been working with since August when we were before you at the council on kind of those top 20 points that the private sector has recommended that we do, and they've been doing really good work. All people at this table have been doing really good work and have some recommendations on that. This would then be on top of that. Just kind of internal to the organization. How do we route plan checks? Who's reviewing what? Is there a better sequencing? Is there a better way to schedule them and that sort of stuff? And so I just think that the community's frustration is at a point that we need to try to be responsive and try that as well. So, fee study. This is a little awkward because I have not budgeted in our proposed budget any revenues from this fee study. And as you can see, the dollars are pretty substantial to the general fund. And so my recommendation to you today is to give us a feel if you want to go forward with the fee study. As Ms. Gray explained, we've done a lot of outreach. We're trying to engage the public, and the public, I think, seems to be acknowledging that full cost recovery is a sound policy. And so our recommendation is that you go forward with that. It does lead to a substantial amount of revenue to the general fund that is no longer having to subsidize those operations. But you've got a number of items that I think are your priorities going forward. And so I want to make sure you take them in total and in context. And we might have a slight separate process outside of the budget to kind of deal with that because they haven't quite lined up perfectly. One of them be you're in salary, you're in negotiations with a number of labor units. And we have been able to budget 1% in the budget. And so if there is an interest to go beyond that, this is one area. I have to say a 1% salary increase to the general fund is a little over $800,000. And so that would pretty much take up most of the revenue that you would see from this. Top priority from City Council was Energy Master Plan. And so you had that report coming to you in July or so. I've seen a preliminary internal administrative draft that talks about staffing a division for energy outreach to the community to help promote more energy efficiency and try to get us to achieve the goal of being carbon-free by 2030, which I think has been a real top priority for City Council. That's in the magnitude of $200,000 to the general fund, but I'm very supportive, and I think you all want us to try to execute on that. And so I want you to keep that dollar amount in the back of your head. We have the Cosmonth study for downtown revitalization. That study also kind of in the June or July just didn't quite line up with the budget. There's probably going to be, it's not rocket science. They're probably going to say we should consider an economic development management position within the city. Or maybe there's a desire by some on council in the community to do a little more kind of one-time special event funding for special events like we just recently had with Experiment Weekend or something like that. You've got the request here from Community Development to put some of the fee increase back into the department, so that's another consideration. And then just other budget adjustments. As you know, I've presented you with the balanced budget, but we don't have any surplus. And so if you wanted to consider a park ranger or some other kind of security approach, this could be a pool to go from. But as you see, you just pull a couple of those strings and you've kind of used the money up. But I want you to be able to consider them in their entirety. So my advice to you would be give us a nod on the fees and then maybe kind of put some of this discussion kind of on hold until early summer when all those kind of come together, and then you can kind of make a decision about how to go forward with that.
Councilwoman Stead?
I just have a question about, I've heard a lot of comments that people would be willing to pay higher fees in exchange for higher customer service. And my concern here is that we might be hitting people with much higher fees, which are fair, which are the fees that they ought to be, but they're not going to see an increase in customer service. As it's laid out from what I'm seeing right here, it's going to be down the line. It's going to be after organizational study. It'll be after Excel is running. It'll be after a lot of things. And maybe you can help me with that, because what I'm seeing is a lot of fees, and they shouldn't be subsidized by the general fund when they're for personal choice fees. I can see that clearly, but I am concerned with sort of we're at this critical point of customer service not matching expectations and the timing of that.
Madam Mayor, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, and council members, one response, and I'll let the table chime in as well. In the proposed budget, we have some additional positions to try to meet at that timeliness issue. The presentation you have tomorrow is trying to make some adjustments to the process to try to meet that timeliness issue. These items as well kind of do, even though they don't kind of ring as meeting the timeliness issue, but the hourly zoning enforcement helps with the zoning plan check process, which has been one of the areas where we've been struggling and has been kind of an Achilles heel of at times on the building permit turnaround time. The information technology, it's frustrating to have to bring in kind of expertise, but at the same time it frees up the staff, as Mr. Stuffler said, for them to get back to playing to their strength. And so that's kind of new value added back into the system. And then, the workflow and organizational study would take a little time to deliver, but I think that's a commitment to the community as well of saying we're going to look internal under the hood and make sure we're doing things as best we can.
So could the public expect an increase in timeliness and customer service at the same time that they're seeing increased fees?
I believe so, and let me tell you why, and it relates to the second bullet point here. If we have the opportunity to bring in contract help with the Excella program, we are going to be able to return 3 full-time employees to the line. Right now we have Danny Cato, who you know, Marcela Salinas, also in planning, and Larry Cassidy, who is our building inspection supervisor. All 3 of these individuals right now are working full-time on Excella, probably even more than full-time. We're going as fast as we can, and my conversation with Christy Schmidt, the Administrative Services Director, and Marianne Knight, our IT manager, is that we can no longer afford, from a customer service perspective, to have these people out of production. We need to have them back, as Mr. Stuffler said, playing to their strength. It's going to be very important for that to happen. And so even though you're not seeing adding additional staff to community development, the result would be freeing up significant staff resource for that effort.
I'm in complete agreement. Thank you.
Mr. Casey, just so I'm clear for today's meeting, we're going to, when we get there, look at the fee study and see whether or not we're supportive of that. But then the other items, we want to maybe recommend deferring for later discussion for Cosmont, labor, and all those. But these 3 we would look at today, kind of giving direction on these 3 items today, or would those be lumped into the other items?
You could do it either way. Or you could say put these 3 kind of on the list to kind of consider balancing them all out. Or you could say, no, these really are, we want to put some money right back into the system from the planning fees. So you could say, no, these are a priority, go do those, and then the rest of the stuff kind of put into this bin for consideration in early summer just after we adopt the budget. I think both those approaches would be fine.
Yeah, Councilman Dominguez?
Can you tell us a little more what the hourly zoning enforcement does? What that $60,000 gets us?
Sure. Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Dominguez, we typically in the zoning enforcement section have had hourly staff to help support the enforcement arm of zoning. So the request to reinstate that $60,000 would keep us at about status quo staffing with 2 permanent full-time enforcement officers and 2 part-time hourly enforcement officers. And among those 3 staff people, they work on sign enforcement cases, land use cases. It might be illegal home occupations. It might be people storing junk in their yard. So a whole host of potential sign and land use or zoning violations that they work through abating them with the property owner or the business tenant.
So this isn't going to help the new business owner or someone doing tenant improvements. These are going after people who never came into the system to begin with?
These, for the most part, yes. They are brought to us through a complaint because someone believes that they're doing something out of compliance with the code. And so it's then our follow-up and then helping them through the whatever process they need to go through to abate the violation. That might mean helping them through the sign committee review process or helping them through building plan check and guiding them through what reviews they would need to do to come into compliance.
And have we thought about doing 3 full-time and then using salary savings when there's attrition? Or why are we looking at 2 part-time hourlies?
We've tended to, so we found that we need more than 2 FTEs to manage the enforcement case log and zoning. And historically, we've augmented that with hourly staff so that we can deal with ebbs and flows of the caseload, so that if we become slower, we can trail back on the staffing. So we've tended to do a blend of permanent and hourly.
Okay, and the reason I'm asking is just going back to the IT, and the question that Councilmember Snedden had was something that we dealt with at Finance Committee, which is how will this throwing these resources at the problem guarantee any results? Because the community has the expectation if we're going to pay more, we want to see results. And so when you mentioned the 3 people that you have working full-time on the IT issue now, what exactly are they doing? Are they doing data entry or data changing or coding? What is the actual day-to-day involvement of that staff if they're not doing planning work?
Mm-hmm. Mayor Pro Tem Friedman and Councilmember Dominguez, let me back up just a little bit so perhaps you can appreciate where we're coming from. To answer your last question on Excella, we have these individuals working on workflow process and putting important processes into place so that the software can operate as efficiently as possible. The expectation is that we will be able to do our jobs faster and to make it more accessible to more people through our online presence. And so we're looking for electronic document review. We're looking for people to be able to find out what's going on their property or at various places around town much easier than what they have today. As in terms of specifically what they're doing, it's working very closely with IT staff and working on those processes to maximize the efficiency. If you'd like a more technical definition, we can provide that to you, but that is in essence what they're doing right now.
I'd like to hear more about it, maybe not at this session.
Okay.
But I would like to know more.
Let me also just interject, if I may, the hourly zoning enforcement. In terms of how things have been working in the planning division over the course of the last number of years, since Ms. Brooke has become city planner, I believe that was in 2015 or it was 2015. I don't think the planning division has been fully staffed since that time. We've always been chasing after various vacancies that have been created through, as was mentioned before, through retirements and people taking jobs in other places. The job market is very strong for planners right now, and people are moving around. They have opportunities for promotion, and they're taking advantage of that. Recruitment has been, we're able to recruit really good people, but keeping up with the need to recruit has been a real challenge, in particular in the planning division. I think right now, for example, we have 1 vacancy that is going to be filled this week, and I think that will be the first time in 5 years that the planning division has been completely staffed up. So if it's a matter of understanding how this, when we have money for hourly help, we do have some flexibility in that in terms of if we have a surge, for example, in the need for zoning plan check, if we have that hourly and an ability to bring in an hourly staff resource, we can bring other hands into the plan check process. And every once in a while we have what we call a plan check party, where it's typically on a dark Friday or over the course of a weekend, usually both, where we just ask people to come in and to try to catch up to the best we can. For the first time since I've been here, this was back right around Thanksgiving, we actually caught up. And that was remarkable. I think we surprised ourselves in terms of the ability to do that. Now, of course, when that happens, it creates a whole bunch of workload that just gets pushed on, but eventually those permits get approved and things get built. So that's a long answer to your question about this hourly money. It does provide flexibility for Renee and her group in how to most appropriately staff based on the demand.
And so in terms of phasing these three, would it be possible to do the workforce and organizational study now, because that might inform our decisions on some of the other pieces of the puzzle? Or what's the soonest we could get that started, and what's the time frame? Is that something that has a ramp-up period, or is that something once we know there are known players in the field who would bid or we could have a contract with?
So I'll give you a glimpse into my thought on this. We already have a really good running start with the report that you will receive tomorrow from recommendations of the Downtown Economic Vitality Working Group. Mr. Johnson, I've spoken with him. He's the gentleman who completed our fee study. He's had an inside glimpse to over 100 organizations throughout the United States, mostly in California, as to how they work. And as he mentioned, there are certain areas in our review process that are robust. And part of that is driven by things like the charter, because we have design review built into the DNA of the community, and that's a good thing. We're not saying that it's a bad thing. I think it's a very good thing. But there might be ways that he could help me or us understand where we might be able to find opportunities for efficiency. That's a quick conversation based on his observation as a fee expert. Then we would look at doing an RFP and asking for proposals for a workflow and organizational study. In terms of timing, I can get together with Mr. Johnson tomorrow. With the rest, I would need funding in the budget in order to get that study off the ground.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so Ms. Gray.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to our performance and work objectives. As you might recall, some of you that were here, some are new. We looked at our performance and work objectives last year in great detail. We worked with Matt Four at the City Administrator's Office and went through basically everyone and either put them in the right category or change them around, and we really looked at what we were counting. So this year there have been some slight adjustments, nothing really new except for I believe one in building and safety. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Stuffler.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, City Council members. These are as you know, building and safety is always working on processing permit applications and inspection requests. So that is a given. That's happening all the time. These 4 items here are additional projects that we'll be working on next fiscal year. So we have what we call a code cycle, where the state publishes a new building code, plumbing code, electrical, mechanical, energy, green building, and on and on. And so we have to prepare to adopt that at the end of this year. So we'll be before you in September, October-ish. With an ordinance that goes into effect January 1st of next year. We've talked about the permit system, business process management, right? So this is where we're going to continue to work on this the first half of next fiscal year to make sure that we are giving the information that we can to the consultant so they can do a good job and finish that up, because we do have a role in that even as an advisor. We're going to implement digital plan check. This is a key part of the public interface and something that we promised the design professionals in the community when we said we were going to purchase this product. We were going to have digital submittals so that they don't have to bring in. I don't know if you've been to my office and seen the rolls of plans, but I mean literally there are 20, 30-pound rolls of plans, and I'm talking 10 or 20 rolls. So I mean it's very expensive for them to make a submittal, and as we have multiple rounds, they're printing out all those plans all over again in 2 and 3 sets. So we want to put an end to that and be a little more efficient with our routing of plans and our plan check. And that's what digital plan check will do. And then, of course, we have a commitment to continue our substandard housing enforcement with the City Attorney's Office. So we'll be working on that as well as our standard substandard housing efforts that we make every day in code enforcement. Those are kind of the 4 big new things that we'll be working on, or continuing efforts that we'll be working on next fiscal year. Now we'll take a look at our P3s and what we're proposing. So I don't like red. I hope you don't like red either. We did pretty good on inspection requests. We do a lot of them. We do 12,000, 13,000 inspections a year. So while it may only look like 2% of 13,000, that's a few customers who didn't get their inspection as they requested it on the day they wanted it, to pour concrete or to avoid rain. So rain damage. So those are, we want to keep that at 100% all the time if we can. The specialty review, the code enforcement complaints being closed, and the time-sensitive code enforcement actions taken, those are because of staffing problems that we had in our inspection and enforcement unit. As you know, we staff for the average workload. So when the workload's heavy, like it is right now in building inspection, we aren't staffed for that. We have to use contract service, so we'll come to you and say we have a contract with Bureau Veritas or California Code Check to provide supplemental staffing for us. And we've done that, and you've been very supportive. But we still struggle. We had an inspector out on medical leave, several inspectors out on medical leave at the same time. We only have 6 inspectors. Now we're down to 4. We start rolling inspections, we start missing plan checks, and our performance goes down. Right now, we are fully staffed, and we're looking at adding an additional staff person just through a reallocation of a position that we have in our division that we can cover elsewhere, cover with other resources. These are the programs or the projects that are involved with our records management group and our archives group. We've had a lot of demand. Whenever we have a lot of construction, we get a lot of demand for people to look at the plans. Whenever the real estate market's hot, we get a lot of people wanting to look at the approved city archive plans. That's what's driving the 80 and 77% on time for the delivery of those services. We have had some staff turnover, but it's been pretty standard staff turnover, and it's been periodic. So really that's just a function of the quantity of plan requests that we're getting. Otherwise, we've done pretty good in that work unit at keeping up with the flow and the demand. In our plan review section, this is going to probably look funny to you, because if your email was anything like my email, it doesn't look like we're hitting the mark, right, in the email, right? All it takes is a couple projects that don't hit the mark, and they fall behind in plan check, and we all get a lot of email about that. But we actually did very well in our plan check in our division. We kept up with all of our marks, and we focused our efforts on making sure we were timely. Now, very well is 80%. That's a B. It's a low B, right? But that's what we said we were committed to. That's what we staffed to. That's what we budgeted to, and we were able to come through and deliver that. The application expiration notices, when we got busy at our building permit counter, that's one of the extra duties that our counter staff do. We just said, look, we won't send people an expiration letter, and they have the permit in their hand. It has an expiration date on it. They know there's no legal requirement that we send that out. That's a courtesy that we do. So we triaged our work efforts, and we said that one we're going to let sit on the side while we serve people who are standing at our counter. And we let that consciously drop to 25%. And with that, I will turn it over to Renee Brooke.
Thank you. So I'll cover our major work efforts in the planning division. What's up on the slide there before you are major work efforts that are underway, and they were also submitted as part of our fiscal year 20 budget, because we anticipate continuing to work on these 4 major work efforts into the next fiscal year. I think you're pretty familiar with the local coastal program update. We just had a major accomplishment at the Coastal Commission with our land use plan last week. We do still have subsequent phases of that work effort, though, with the sea level rise adaptation plan and the lower cost overnight accommodations. So that continues to be a major work effort. Amendments to the average unit size density ordinance kicked off a pretty big first workshop a couple weeks ago on that. So that is starting to get underway. Housing streamlining bill, that's really implementation of Senate Bill 35 and developing objective design criteria for multi-unit housing projects. That's underway. We have a subcommittee of the design boards and planning commissioners working on that. And then we remain committed to continuing implementing our historic resources element and what we call our 5-year historic preservation program. The largest component of that we've been working on for some time is the amendments to Title 22 of the Municipal Code that would restructure and organize that title to address historic districts, how to establish historic districts, and also clarify the role and function of the Historic Landmarks Commission and which projects are under their purview, how to designate structures as structures of merit and landmarks. And that's been a long time work effort for us.
Mr. Pro Tem, if I could just interrupt really quick. The adoption of the local coastal plan unanimously by the Coastal Commission on our first hearing is a huge accomplishment, and I just don't want to understate that. I want to congratulate Ms. Brooke, Mr. Buell, and the entire team. They had a real team working on it. Monthly meetings with coastal staff over 3 years, going line by line through our proposal. We had maybe 3 or 4 meetings with the executive director of the Coastal Commission talking about the plan. The state is littered with communities that are struggling with getting their local coastal plans adopted. And so this was a real win, both for us, but also for the Coastal Commission to point to a success. And so I'm really proud of the planning effort that went over many years to get that accomplished. And I don't want to understate that. It was a really big accomplishment.
Thank you for raising that, Mr. Casey, and thank you to staff for all you did in getting that. I know it was a big hearing last week, and it's great to have that kind of getting one step closer to being checked off this list, too. So thank you.
We hope so. So then as we look ahead beyond the next fiscal year, you'll recall we have semi-annual joint meetings with the Planning Commission and City Council. And we decided to try to do things differently this time. We didn't have a joint meeting in the spring, and instead we went to the Planning Commission on April 4th and wanted to have a more in-depth, really lengthy discussion with the Planning Commission on their recommended priorities for the Planning Division's major work efforts over the next couple of years, and then to have them give you a more formal recommendation based on that discussion. The feedback we were hearing about the joint meetings is that it was difficult to have that sort of deliberative discussion. There wasn't always a lot of time to do it. So the outcome of the April 4th meeting, and there was a memo that we prepared for you a few days ago attaching the Planning Commission's meeting minutes with their recommendation to you. But the essence of what was recommended is this overall Gantt chart of our existing and potentially future major work efforts for the Planning Division. Just what's shown here in the yellow are our existing work efforts, so you're probably pretty familiar with all of those. Working solidly on those through fiscal year 20, and then those in the blue are the next 4 major work efforts that were recommended to Planning Commission as staff's highest priorities, and the Planning Commission agreed with that. That being doing a supplemental program EIR for our general plan. That general plan EIR was adopted by City Council in 2010 for the 2011 general plan update. There are certain sections that should be updated to not only reflect existing changed conditions, but also just changes in law. Climate Action Plan update has been something we've been wanting to take on for quite a while, and really to update the plan to address the new targets that the state has, as well as really trying to be pretty aggressive in how we go forward as a community and as a city to address climate change. The Title 30 certification by the California Coastal Commission, that really, first there's an internal city process that needs to take place before we can work on submitting that to the Coastal Commission. But our first big hurdle is to get our land use plan certified by the Coastal Commission. And we hope that when we return that back through the local process for acceptance by Planning Commission and City Council, we can check off that box and we'll have our policies in place for the coastal zone. The next step then is to work on the code level requirements, the real development standards, which is our zoning ordinance. We want to submit that to the Coastal Commission so that we would have a code more closely mirror Title 30. Right now, Title 28 is in effect in the coastal zone, and in some cases it's pretty different from Title 30. We'd like to have the development standards more closely match both inland and in the coastal zone. So that's a subsequent work effort. We still need to make a couple cleanup amendments to Title 30 through the local review process before we're ready to submit that as an entire package to the Coastal Commission. And then under SB 743 is legislation that was passed, I think, in 2013. It calls for a switch in how we analyze traffic impacts for environmental review, with a switch from level of service to vehicle miles traveled. There's a deadline of July 2020 that communities are to have reprogrammed how we do environmental review of traffic impacts. We can do it sooner, but that's our deadline right now set by the state. So we know that has an impending deadline. We need to take that on fairly soon. So that was Planning Commission's recommendations for our next work efforts.
Councilwoman Snedden has a question.
Yeah, I just had a question about process on this and where we are in this. I was personally disappointed that we didn't have an opportunity to meet with Planning Commission, even if it was to have coffee and chat about what our dreams for the city are. So my question for this is, was this presented to Planning Commission in this format and then it was approved by them and it's bringing, I mean, is this when it's being brought back to us, or is that going to be a separate item at council, or at what point does the council weigh in on this?
Certainly. Thank you for that question. So we do anticipate having the joint meeting in the fall with the Planning Commission and Council. We were attempting to handle this differently in the spring and relate it more toward budget. So our discussion with the Planning Commission was pretty robust. We talked about quite a few different work efforts. Ultimately, they ended up recommending the same four that we were recommending, and we are not asking for additional staff. So the presentation being as part of our budget presentation is this would be the time to discuss it. If with existing staff, if you concur with these next few work efforts. In the past, we had presented to council what else we might be able to accomplish if we had additional staff, but we're not asking for that in this scenario. We wanted to make sure we stayed within our existing resources. What could we reasonably take on? Also considering what elements of these have specific deadlines we have to meet. So there's some wiggle room in when we take on some of these work efforts, but we do believe that these four are pretty critical in the realm of all of our potential future work efforts.
I'm not in disagreement, just to be clear. I'm just, the process part is not clear to me. So this is the result of having had discussion back and forth with Planning Commission, and these are the agreed upon work priorities after. Okay, we may discuss that later, I guess. That's so. Okay.
Yes, and the Planning Commission did have a number of other recommendations that they wanted forwarded to council, and that's in their minutes as well. But in terms of the next four major work efforts, in terms of priorities for the Planning Division, we did agree on those.
And then if we had any input on these, and I'm not saying that I do, this would be the time to discuss that? Is that the process that we've set up by not having a spring meeting?
Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Snedden, yes, we could take that feedback now. However, Some of these efforts will require outside consultant help, and we haven't identified funding sources for those, so there will be subsequent council action required before we commence. For example, the General Plan Supplemental Program, EIR, will need technical consultants and additional help for that. So at those times when we are presenting to you, we believe we're ready to commence this project, but we might have a funding request associated with that. That would be certainly a time to weigh in on whether or not it's right for the council at the time or right for the planning division to be taking on the particular work effort.
But in terms of workload priorities, this is from the joint with Planning Commission and staff, and this is later in this presentation is when we would discuss if we had input to those priorities.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
If I may, Mayor Pro Tem Friedman, Councilmember Sneddon, I also would like to bring to the council's attention, you're very aware, or you're likely aware, that there are multiple pieces of legislation currently underway in Sacramento right now related to housing and planning. A few weeks ago, Councilmember Dominguez, Finance Director Samario, and I attended Legislative Action Days with the League of California Cities up in Sacramento, and at that point we had the opportunity to meet with representatives and representatives themselves, Assemblymember Limon's office, as well as State Senator Jackson's office. And over the course of the next at least couple of years, probably more, under Governor Newsom, we need to be prepared to understand what's happening, what's being proposed in legislation, what that means to Santa Barbara, and how we might respond to those. And when the various measures are consistent with with the council's legislative platform, staff will prepare letters that will be sent to whoever is appropriate in the legislative process. But what this also is doing, I was just speaking with City Planner Brooke this morning. We need to be prepared to understand and to communicate back to the City Administrator's office what the implications are in terms of our urban forum impact on the city, as well as what it would take to respond in various scenarios immediately, medium term, long term. You see here on the slide in the middle, toward the middle bottom, new amended state or federal law. That list is going to grow longer over the course of the next couple of years. And so I just want to give you a heads up that we are aware of that. We're preparing to respond. We need to be nimble in how we approach that oncoming legislation.
Before I go to Councilman Dominguez, just in response to your questions regarding the Planning Commission, Commissioners Campanella and Schwartz are here, and they're going to come up and speak immediately following our staff presentation, which will help us provide some context before we get into our line of questioning. Councilman Dominguez, go ahead.
So I'm profoundly disappointed that we didn't have a chance to address how we deal with the joint meeting. It is a recent revelation to me, and being the liaison to some of our land use advisory groups, it's disappointing that there wasn't a little more process involved. It's been a useful meeting. It's been a good chance for all council members to hear what all planning commissioners think, and vice versa. It's a chance for listening, and it's a chance for speaking, and it happens twice a year. And this is one of the processes I think that's been foundational to the city of Santa Barbara in terms of keeping our design review process at the top in the state. It's a great opportunity for that communication, and I'm glad that they had a chance to look at this, and I would like an opportunity to hear what the discussion was, what the trends were that they've identified, what the majority felt. So I don't know if that's something that you just want to bring to us as a presentation, if you want to do it at a planning commission meeting where we get invited, or if you just want us to watch the video. That to me is the least effective way. And then substantively, what worries me about this is SB 35 implementation. So that could be as long as July or June of next year until that's wrapped up.
Councilmember Dominguez, that I'm estimating that to be about midway through FY20, so about December of this calendar year, the end of second quarter.
So it should be done by December of this year?
That's our hope, yes.
So the worry is, and SB 35 was passed, when was that passed?
It was last fall, I believe.
Okay, so it'll be about a year and a quarter, and that's better than we did, for example, with the ADU law out of Sacramento. My worry is that we're taking longer than a year to respond to any Assembly and Senate bills, which means we're getting backed up. So I wonder if there's a way where we can have an instant implementation of the boldest features to respond to these bills, and then take maybe more time with the more nuanced things. But with SB 50, looking to put in fourplexes in our single family design areas, I would want to have a reaction that can possibly take place, part of it at least, before the bill is implemented, so that we're protected, and then we can deal with some of the longer term processes. I think maybe some of the more nuanced processes we can wrap into an ongoing process, an annual update, where you could bring in the AUD, SB 50, and S35 into smaller fixes. But the bigger fixes we can do rapidly. I'd like to see us maybe look at breaking it up, but whatever we can so that we can react faster than a year, so we're not getting behind the 8 ball.
Very good points, Councilmember Dominguez. Mr. Casey, being that we were agendized till 5 o'clock, and some of my colleagues are expressing they want to have a more in-depth conversation about these priorities. We still have 2 planning commissioners here who are going to speak. Trying to find in terms of agenda management for tonight if we continue or if we were to have another day. What do you recommend? Councilmember Harmon will have to leave shortly. I'm not sure about my other colleagues if they do as well.
Well, first, Madam Mayor, I just want to follow up real quick. We sent an email out about 3 months ago talking about this trying a new approach as opposed to the joint meeting. So I think we let council be aware of that. Didn't hear any objections at that time. They had a very long meeting with the Planning Commission, staff did, about the workload priorities. On the other hand, it's very easy for a majority of you to ask us to schedule a joint meeting with the Planning Commission. If we miss the boat and it's super important for you to have, tell us, we'll schedule it, and we can do it. So that's clearly at the discretion of council about how to go forward. Agenda management. I know, I think that the remainder, once you get through this workload priority, the rest of the stuff goes pretty quick. It's CDBG, it's housing, and the human service stuff. Councilwoman Harmon has to leave, though, and we did schedule it to 5. So we could either barrel through and she could watch the replay, or we could have that portion come back at another budget hearing. But it'll go pretty quick, I think.
So we're all good to go past 5, so we will continue with the presentation, and then at the end when we're giving comments and direction on the fees, we can also touch on the issue of whether or not we want to schedule a meeting with the council and planning commission. We'll do that at that time. So let's go ahead, Ms. Brooke.
Thank you. I'll wrap up quickly in talking about performance objectives in the planning division. In development review section, we hit every mark except for one that is mostly out of our control. The environmental analyst billing is a service we provide to other city departments when they're processing projects through our own land development process. We often will provide environmental review support to them, and we've been understaffed in that particular program, and at the same time, other departments have been staffing up with planners themselves. So they haven't had the need for that service necessarily in the recent past in the planning division. So we didn't meet that mark. In zoning and enforcement, the first line is initial enforcement action. So that's our zoning enforcement measure, and we didn't meet that mark. That's partially due to, as Mr. Buell mentioned, when we are understaffed at other parts of the planning division, we will often pull from the enforcement section to supplement zoning information reports or zoning plan check. And so that is most likely the section, the particular duty that suffers when we're understaffed. And so that's why it helps to have hourly staff to hold down the fort while the permanent staff are off on other temporary assignments. We didn't meet our initial zoning plan check review target, but we did meet it for resubmittals. And then we did well in zoning information report production, meeting those timelines. And then in design review, we got pretty close. We were on target for 2 of the 3 performance objectives here.
Okay, the next one is the land development team major work effort. It's basically Excella, which we've talked about, so I'm going to go past that one. And the next division is Housing and Human Services, and they are on track to meet all of their fiscal year 19 objectives. Just to be clear, for general fund, their responsibilities are the Human Services Program, homelessness response, which you've recently had a presentation on, including the HEAP grant, and the rental housing mediation program. And for administration, that's my division, and it covers the budget, accounting, graphic design, and administrative support. The other funds should go quickly. The first one is the Redevelopment Agency Retirement Obligation Fund. This shows the revenues and expenditures. There is a big change in this year. We paid off our RDA bonds in March. So that's why the revenue is going down by $7 million, and the transfer debt and the debt service is going down by a similar amount. The capital outlay is going down because the fiscal year 19 includes the remaining Cabrillo Pavilion project, which will be completed. Hopefully not completed, but our money will be spent by the end of June. For fiscal year 20, the only capital project we have is a wisteria arbor that is to go in at Chase Palm Park. This was kind of a big win for us because it comes from tax increment money, and it's something the city was obliged to put in, and we asked them 2 times, and we finally got a yes from them, so that was good news. The key responsibilities are to prepare the annual recognized obligation payment schedule. Hopefully, we're hoping in fiscal year 20 to prepare our final obligation payment schedule. That means that we're kind of on track to wind it down. The wisteria arbor will be the outstanding capital project that I'm not sure how long it will take, but if we know what our exact expenses are, they'll let us do our final obligation schedule. The next fund is the Affordable Housing Fund. These are repayment monies from the RDA housing set-aside funds that we had for many, many years, and we are getting repayment monies in. Slight projected increase for repayments for next year. It's just kind of an average of what we've been getting in. The projection for the expenditures, there's 2 areas where the change is very high: special projects, and that is because the fiscal year 19 amended budget includes the $2 million grant for Johnson Court to the Housing Authority. We typically only budget $50,000 for special projects in this fund, and then when a project comes up, we come to you and ask for the use of reserve funding. The debt service, $2.7 million. That was not actual funding that we expended in fiscal year 19. It is due to the debt forgiveness for Garden Court that came to you. For affordable housing, their key responsibilities in the administration area is to preserve affordable housing by certifying compliance of all of our affordable housing units. We have 1,270 rental and 460 owner-occupied. To assure compliance with the affordable restrictions on initial sales, resales, or refinancing of any of our affordable housing projects. To assure compliance with the city's inclusionary housing ordinance. That's our owner-occupied inclusionary ordinance, not to be confused with the one that you're discussing for rental. And to assure compliance of loan repayments. And this program is on track to meet all of their fiscal year 19 objectives. This chart just kind of shows you the available project funding. These are the reserves. As of June 30th, 2018, we had about $2.2 million in reserves. We project to use $125,000 of that this year. We expect to receive about $925,000 in repayment, so our estimated balance at the end of 19 is about $3 million. And just to note, the majority that we use for projects are RDA housing successor, so we're projecting that one to be 1.7. The inclusionary housing fund, that is money that's been set aside for owner-occupied moderate housing, and we have not yet spent any of that funding. So we've been collecting it for years, and it's sitting there waiting for a project.
Councilman Dominguez?
Can this fund be used for bridge housing?
The inclusionary?
The $3 million estimated balance?
I don't know. It
Or
would
is it
depend on the
restricted?
details. I would have to confer with the city attorney's office on that. Each one of those has different requirements.
Okay, thank you.
And
just to clarify that real quick, a lot of times they have restrictions about the affordability levels and what types and what affordability levels. So I think that's what Ms. Gray was talking about. It would depend on when you say bridge housing, for what income level, for what kind of project, and then we'd have to mix and match and see if we have any flexible funds or how restrictive they are.
And I'm talking about the homeless, transferring them from, shelter to permanent housing. There's sometimes we put them in a intermediary housing versus going straight in.
yeah, I believe the answer is no. I think it has to be permanent housing instead of that midway transitional point, but that would be something that we could find out. The last funds are our federal home and community development block grant funds. We receive, we're an entitlement jurisdiction for both funds, which means we receive an annual allocation. And it's based on several factors, including population, income level, age of housing stock. For home funds, we are projecting, well, actually, we're not projecting. We have recently heard from HUD. Our actual fiscal year 20 allocation is $498,000. It's about $23,000 less than the current year. But as you can see, it took a little jump up from 18 to 19. And if in fiscal year 18, some of you will remember that we were afraid we were going to lose the funds totally. So we're happy with this. We also have a few outstanding loans for the home program. Now we are pretty much giving out grants for it. We've spent most of our home funds in the last couple of years on tenant-based rental assistance grants that we've given to Transition House, the Housing Authority, and New Beginnings, the safe parking program, so that they can do, it's kind of like the bridge funding for people. It's for, like the Housing Authority uses theirs for people who are on their Section 8 waiting list, and we can provide rent subsidies for up to 2 years for people. So the hope is that by the time 2 years is up, that they will have gotten a permanent place or permanent subsidy. Let's see, up to 10% of our home funds can be used for administration. The rest of it has to be loaned or granted for affordable housing projects or tenant-based rental assistance. And our home regulations state that the assistance has to be for very low and low-income households. And finally, Community Development Block Grant, our allocation for fiscal year 20 is just slightly below 19. We also have some program income from that, from our housing rehab loan program. For several years, we did a single unit loan program. We're still getting repayments on that. They've gone down over the years. They used to be in the area of $600,000 to $800,000 a year. We typically budget $300,000 a year. This year, it's coming in a little bit lower. It depends. Both this income and the home program income depend on whether anybody pays off their loans. If they move or they pass away, then the loan comes due. The actual, so it makes the repayments a little bit higher. It's not just the monthly payments that are made. Community Development Block Grant funds, up to 20% can be used for administration. Up to 15% can be used for public services, which we combine with the general fund monies that council makes available for human services. and at least 65% need to be spent for capital projects. And in April, Council approved the grants, 7 CDBG Capital and 42 CDBG Public Service and General Fund Human Service grants. And that is the end of.
So before I open it up for questions, I'm going to ask our two planning commissioners, Schwartz and Campanella, you're here. If you want to come up together, up to 5 minutes to clarify questions and talk about the April 4th meeting.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem Friedman and members of the council. It's a pleasure to be here today. First, I think it's important on behalf of the Planning Commission to frame the lead up to the April 4th Planning Commission hearing. Ms. Brooke came to a Planning Commission lunch meeting earlier in the year. We inquired about whether or not there was going to be the typical semi-annual joint work session with council, and there was a discussion with some insight from staff that staff has heard over the years from both some council members and some planning commissioners, some dissatisfaction, shall we say, with the format, with the rushed time frame in which questions and comments could take place at that joint work session. And staff asked if we were comfortable having a planning commission only session. We said yes, and it was agendized for April 4th, and that did occur. So I wanted to make sure there was no misinformation sent to council as to how it occurred. We didn't initiate it or generate it, but certainly, as Mr. Casey and Mr. Buell, I think, have alluded to, it was a long and in-depth session, as was warranted. So with that, I also want to respond to what I think I heard from Council Members Snedden and Dominguez in terms of some questions. And let me just say that with some constrained staff resources, the Planning Commission stands ready to do work for you and the community in terms of meeting bandwidth that we have. As you see on the city website today, we have had 8, as of this Thursday, 8 meetings canceled this year. So we have vacancy, we have space and time, and a significant increase to do the heavy lifting land use work for you and for the community that I think is needed, and perhaps that staff on its own does not have the resources to undertake, although obviously we'd need to do that in concert with staff. Having said that, I want to go straight to my portion of the remarks today, and then Commissioner Campanella is going to come forward. We've bifurcated our remarks and our role here today. Also to let you know that our chair, Leslie Wiscombe, and our vice chair, Mike Jordan, have been strongly supportive of Commissioner Campanella and I being here today and making these remarks to you. So in terms of the April 4th hearing, we're here today because we want to have a very direct and forthright communication with you about what occurred. Yes, indeed, some of the staff recommendations were supported by Planning Commission, and I hope you have the May 8th memo from staff signed by George Buell and Renee Brooke. But I want to reference attachment 1 behind their staff report, because that constitutes the meeting minutes of the Planning Commission's April 4th meeting. And in those meeting minutes, you will see a motion, a successful motion made by Commissioner Campanella, and I seconded that motion, that has on page 3 of 4 in this attachment 5 separate recommendations from the Planning Commission, separate from the 4 bulleted recommendations that were already presented to you today. So staff's prior recommendations constitute the 6th bullet point in your attachment and in our meeting minutes. We spent a great deal of time crafting the other 5 recommendations, and I'm going to ask Commissioner Campanella to discuss those with you. Given the late time today, we would offer ourselves to stay throughout the evening in council chambers and answer any questions you have, but perhaps for another time. But again, just know that the recommendations, in some cases, to accelerate a number of key policy and planning items, including housing, we have the meeting bandwidth, we are passionate about, and we will do that work for you and for the community as soon as you ask that we get that agendized. So look forward to hearing more from you. And now I'm going to ask Commissioner Campanella to please come up if you would.
Do I run around the block, or I got 37
You'll have
seconds.
more than the time. You'll have extra time. So.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem and council members. If you do have in front of you the minute meetings that we had from the meeting of April 4th, you'll see on page 3 our motion. And if I could also ask staff maybe to put the flow chart up on the screen. First of all, we did support staff's recommendation for their 4 items prioritization, but in addition to that, we felt there were important points that we wanted to get addressed by staff and see if they could be implemented as well. One of them was to take the general plan supplemental program EIR that they recommended, which was previously prioritized in April 2018, and accelerate it. Okay? As you see on the screen, that item, General Plan Supplemental Program EIR, takes about eight quarters to do and doesn't start for some time out. The impression we had, because that covers a description that we received, both jobs housing balance as well as making sure our EIR can handle supplemental and more incremental and support project changes that would not be subject to very high or extensive EIR review. So given that understanding, it was, could this possibly hold up some of the processes if this was not updated? I do not know the answer to that because I'm not familiar with everything goes into it, but to wait that period of time before starting it and perhaps not being able to do some things on job housing balance or satisfying RENA allocations, I don't know. So we wanted that to be accelerated, and that was our first recommendation, get that EIR done quickly. Secondly, you'll see the AUD program amendments, and those have been around for 2 years, that those amendments were going to be made. All they've been doing is adding, in my mind, to uncertainty of applicants on what exactly are they going to have to comply with when they submit their applications. So we wanted to accelerate that. There's 3 items. Parking, which is likely going to be increasing it in some areas. We can handle that quickly. Take it to a meeting, get public input. Is it hurting the program or not? What's the cost? What's the benefits? That can be done quickly. Secondly, downtown revitalization. We're on that right now. Nobody's going to move down in the donut hole or anywhere else unless they know what the rules are going to be. That's critically important if we want to revitalize downtown. That shouldn't take 8 quarters. That's got to be done now. The last piece is relooking where the priority overlay is and where the densities are. That is a major effort, okay? No net loss provisions for the state. You want to make sure you have enough potential surplus property to handle your RENA numbers. That's one of the items that's contained in there. Okay, you don't see it on there, but it's the moving the priority overlay around. In my mind, that one really should be deferred out. That should take place when you do your housing element update, so you consider all of those factors at once and not try to piecemeal it right now. Lastly, staff had recommended back in December that the City Council entertain the fact to eliminate the trial period. Okay? That's still in front of us. We now have, I think, 270 units either completed or under construction. We know what they are. We know where they are. We know what they look like. We have an idea what the rent's going to be, how they compare to Goleta, or how do they compare to other rents in town. If anyone else is going to submit an application not knowing whether this test is going to be over in the next 12 or 15 months, and it takes them 2 to 3 years to get approval, who is going to submit? Okay? So we'd like to entertain how do we evaluate that test with the information we have available. Can we do it? Say yes or no. And look forward to the fact if it does expire, we do say no, that we're going back to variable density, which are high-end condos. I would make a suggestion based upon what went on today for your consideration. When we have our joint meeting, that should be the one topic. Let's discuss the trial period. the pros, cons, let's get an idea. If we're not going to make a decision, when will we, versus now waiting for the last unit to get completed. Third item, this is really, if we want to increase housing production, how do we do it? Do we just wait for people to come in, or do we try to reach out to the property owners and community to incentivize it, especially in the downtown core? We also said we should be using the housing authority as more of a tool to go out and try to do public-private partnerships. Witness the Korea lot. You have a public-public sort of a partnership going on, but they could also help developers taking part of their inclusionary units, more affordable units, helping the process, and we'd like to reach out to them and do really an effort to try to get more housing on the ground. Lastly, adaptive management program. There's changes that need to be looked at as we go. Okay, the world's changing, and we should really have people that are available in staff to start looking at how do we really address issues, including our annual progress report that we send to the state. That shows what actions are we taking to implement our housing element. And there's a lot of items in there that could be implemented as part of an adaptive management program, and we should look at that. Lastly, can you look at this workflow and see how we can either compress or do two items at a time, do some overlapping, so everything doesn't look like it's linear, okay? Can we accelerate that process where we get benefit from one action item and it really helps the next one that's coming along, or you can do it concurrently at the same time? So that's what we spent a lot of time thinking about. That's what we are offering. And hopefully with some saving in staff time that you can come up with due to your Accelerate program, that you could start assigning some staff to try to accelerate this process. And if we do some of the items like start looking at the AUD program and bringing it to an end, there's a lot of staff time that's going to free up. Because we all know how many meetings we have to go to, how many staff reports have to be regurgitated every time we bring up one topic on that subject. So thank you for your time, and we appreciate being able to give you our feelings that came up at the April 4th meeting. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Campbell and Schwartz. So now I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues for questions and closing comments, but I do want to help us focus on some of the direction that staff needs today. If you could mention one, the fees in general, whether you support them or not. If you could pull up slide 36 briefly. And then also the third point while they're pulling that up is a joint planning commission meeting, and then whether or not we want to have one. And then on slide 36 here, on these three specific proposals, if we want to move forward or give direction to move forward with one, two, or three of these, but also whether or not we want to group those in with some of the other priorities that we know are coming, such as Cosmont study, the energy, if we want to wait on any of those. So if you could incorporate those into your comments so staff can have clear direction, that would be helpful. I see Councilman Rouse and then Councilman Dominguez. You have the floor, Councilman Rouse.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Very quickly, address Planning Commission's comments first. We happen to have a particularly strong and talented Planning Commission right now, and we've been struggling with some very long and very painful land use issues upon council. So I think the more that we can leverage our Planning Commission, the better it is, and really have them get down into the grains of our land use issues and use them more than we have, especially in some of the recent things and some of the upcoming issues as well. So I accept the invitation that Commissioner Schwartz put forward about using them. And in terms of the joint meeting, and to me, having 14 microphones with opinions is unwieldy. The ability for staff to get down and to get into the issues of Planning Commission, get the priorities squared away, and give us a better direction, I think is really, really important. We can have a joint meeting at some point in time, but it's not really how we get work done. It's more informational. That got something done. So I think I appreciate doing that. I think the more that we do that, the better, frankly. Back to the presentation, clearly we're going to have another bite at the community development apple tomorrow, but I think staff clearly understands and hears the same comments we hear. I think anything they can do about reforming or improving process is important. If staff sees these service enhancements as important or as viable, I'm going to back them up. I think it is true what my colleagues have said about people are going to expect an enhancement in service as well, but I don't think I haven't heard much comment out there about people complaining about how much the fees are as much as I hear about how long things take. So anything that is directed towards, and staff is clearly open to this, better service, more expeditious service, and somehow taming the uncertainty of the process. That's the biggest thing at all. And like I said, there's nobody in this room that hasn't heard that a gazillion times. So I am going to be backing staff recommendations.
Thank you, Councilman Dominguez.
Thank you, commissioners, for being here. Planning commissions around the state do the hardest work in local government, and they're generally unpaid volunteers, and ours is no exception. And you two in particular are some of the hardest working members in our city government. So thank you very much. And I think in terms of moving forward with Planning Commission, City Council, I'd love to have that be one of the topics at one of our joint meetings or even separately, but how we can better work together as two groups who are fundamentally interconnected. I think we should move forward with the organizational study today. I made that known last year. I thought we should have started last year. So I'm happy to do something to move that forward. The fees, I think as long as we can provide assurances through performance measures that they'll provide some change, I'm definitely in favor of those. I think the organizational study would provide the objective component. I know the department head, George Buell, has done a great job of meeting with what is it called, the Revitalization Task Force. I know you put up a survey on your website. I know you've met with some frequent flyers for the system in the past, so you really have, I think, your hands wrapped around what the subjective component. I think this type of study could help us objectively move forward. Thank you.
Who's next? Councilman Sneddon.
Thank you. So just it does sound like a lot of work got accomplished in the work meeting, and then I guess my question about process is how does that get communicated back to us and how we do our input? So whether that's in a joint meeting or not, I mean, I had understood that it was the Planning Commission that had not wanted to have a joint meeting, but it maybe sounds like maybe we need to have those joint meetings. That's just maybe not this one. This sounds like we've had the communication now at this point. And I think for the fall, format-wise, I think we do need an opportunity to just talk about what our priorities and how we communicate with each other. Maybe not just the setting up priority list, but we have some issues, I think, where things go to Planning Commission and then they come to us and we're not having a communication. So that's on us, but I share Councilman Dominguez's views that you work very hard, and Councilmember Rouse's views that you are the ones who are equipped and qualified to get granular, I think is what you said, and we appreciate that, and I think I would appreciate the opportunity to have that communication going both ways. For the fees, some of these fees, I guess the ones I have a hard time with, I mean, just looking through them, some of them on coastal development, I mean, some go from $12,000 to $20,000 or $2,000 to $13,000. And I look at those and say, whoa, I'm not sure how that hits the community. And the percentage on that, well, one of them is 266%, but some of them, the percent is small, but the actual amount is large. So in general, I'm in favor of the fees matching what the actual cost is, and particularly when they're personal choice fees. That was a really nice graphic laid out with the bubbles of which come from taxes and which come from personal choice pots of money, I guess. So I'm a little bit conflicted about the fees, honestly. I think they should come up, and I think we could use that revenue well and efficiently. I just think that maybe some of these might need to be staggered so that it's not all at once, or I guess input from you on that. I don't know how often that type of permit comes up that's going to go up to $20,000, and is that going to, are we going to be hearing about that?
Mayor Pro Tem, Council Member Snedden, there are several that say they're going to be increased over a 3-year period.
Okay, so
and
those would
I do
be,
understand that there are some that are higher amounts than 2,500, but the percentage isn't greater. And that decision, I just think it's not proportionately on a developer side. It's not that much.
okay. I'm going to take your input on that because it's not an area that I'm familiar.
They're large increases, no doubt about it. On the other hand, they're usually kind of one-time fees that people pay. So it's not like they've paid this fee 5 times before and they're coming in again and, oh my gosh, it's such a big increase. It's usually kind of a one-off, so the fee is what it is. So,
okay.
But on some we have recommended phasing it in, but others.
So with the phased in, then I am in favor. I think, and I'm very happy that you took that into account, that the difference that might be, and the 3-year period seems, it seems like a good timeline. And I support all of these, anything that gets our plan checkers back, checking plans, and gets that customer service availability with the people who have the expertise in this. I'm in favor of, and I'm sorry that the Excella has taken so long, and whatever we can do to stop being burdened by that rollout, I'm in favor of, to just move beyond that. So I believe, does that answer your 3 questions? And I'm appreciative that it does sound, I mean, I know the whole department is working hard toward meeting the needs of the community, and I'm sure it's hardest on all of you who are interfacing with everybody daily and hearing, we hear the shadow of the complaints, and I think you hear it all the time, and I'm sure that's difficult, and thank you for trying to move past that and forward with that, and making some real concrete efforts.
Before I turn over to Councilwoman Harmon, there were no public comment speaker slips. I neglected before we had our comments to open and close public comment, so there were no public comment speakers. I'm going to open and close public comment right now for the official record, and I'll turn it over to Councilwoman Harmon.
Thank you very much. I'll start by echoing my appreciation for Planning Commission. You've both spent a lot of time bringing me up to speed on where you're at. I appreciate that, and as well as the work that community development does. We are so grateful. I'm going to keep my comments very brief and to the point. I am supportive of full cost recovery of the fees. I think it's a good idea. I feel similarly to Councilmember Dominguez in that I think the workflow and organizational study is a great place to start in terms of finding efficiencies, and I think people would be very responsive to that idea. I think for me, as far as the other 2, while I'm generally very supportive of the IT person coming in, I think I would like to see it in the context of all of the other issues. Given how much money that costs, I think it makes sense to think about it in the context of these other concerns that we might be spending money on. So that's just my preference. And I think the joint PC City Council meeting has been covered adequately by my colleagues. Thank you.
Councilman Gutierrez.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to appreciate everybody that showed up today and all the hard work that you've been doing. I know that that you get a lot of criticism, and I appreciate everything that you've done to keep us up to date about your efforts. I wasn't sure if, does your department at all offer any type of education on how to basically apply for permits or what to do if you get fined? One thing I've been hearing a lot from my residents is that they don't know how to go about doing that, and they would ask me if there was any resources on how they can learn to do that. So does your department offer anything like that? Any kind of tutorial videos or any kind of step-by-step workshops or anything?
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Gutierrez, we have a lot of information available on our website, and in the event that you come into contact with a constituent that would like to understand more about what we do and how to go about to secure permits for construction, we would be happy to work with those individuals and point them in the direction that they need to go.
Do we have to wait for them to come to us, or is there some way we can let our residents know that this is something that they could get ready for even before they actually own a property or are in charge of permitting?
Mayor Pro Tem and Councilmember Gutierrez, are you asking if we have a training program on how to apply for permits or how to abate code enforcement efforts?
Yeah. I mean, for example, like right now, I got a phone call from a property owner crying because he has to sell his house because he got fined, and it broke my heart to listen to him. And not to be heartless, I asked him, well, did you know what you were in for by becoming a property owner? And he said, no, but I wish that somebody had reached out to me to teach me, and I felt bad that he felt that way. So that's why I'm asking, do we offer anything like that?
No, we don't, and I'm not aware of any community that does, but if someone is, I'd like to know about that program, because it's pretty complicated to understand how to manage development. And I think I think I know who you're speaking to as far as the constituent who had the problem, and it was a perfect example of not knowing what they were doing, and they just every step of the way they stepped deeper into the quicksand. Very, very sad, outcome.
If there could be some sort of future efforts to maybe think about starting a program like that, I would be supportive of it and help out as much as I can. But other than that, I'll support the staff recommendations.
Great. Well, thank you all. Thank you to staff for a very thorough presentation and being able to answer the questions, and our two planning commissioners for the clarity you provided in regards to the April 4th meeting. Keep my comments brief. I do support the fee restructuring, and I do think it is predicated upon all three of those to make it work. We had a discussion about if we're going to increase them, we need to have enhanced performance measures, performance outcomes for the public. That's the key issue. And I think actually number 2 is the most likely to achieve that goal because it will put some of our key staff back to where they need to be. And it will also hopefully address Councilmember Dominguez's very valid concern about, this project's taken a while, and by going forward with that, we'll have the experts on there that can hopefully speed that process up. In terms of the Planning Commission, I do accept your offer. I think we can utilize you better, and I appreciate you raising that to our attention. We have a lot of bright minds on there. The one question I just have is in terms of, does staff have the capacity to do that? So as we go through it, just help us understand that and what that would entail, because I think staff would be using you to the best of their ability, but I think it could be some staffing issues with that. So I just want to make sure that we have the capacity and we're strategic in how we use you as well, because I don't want to have meetings that aren't productive and not a use of your time or staff's time. So I'm supportive of exploring that idea and what it would be and how many meetings and the specific topics. In terms of the joint meeting, while I share the sentiment of some of my colleagues, I think Councilmember Rouse and I are lockstep on this one. You have 14 individuals, plus the staff presentation. It can get unwieldy, and I think the fact that the route that we did go this year, I think we learned more in the 10 minutes that we had from our two planning commissioners here after they had an in-depth discussion. I think that's almost as valuable as what we could achieve from a meeting. So where we all have limited time to all these issues. So when we do have meetings in the future, I would say that maybe we can strategically look at some of the key items that are coming up, because in the past we've looked at everything, but maybe it is the ADU expiration, maybe it is the state, but just focus on one, maybe two items. And another idea I had is that it might be worthwhile for us to form some type of subcommittee comprised of 2 council members and 2 planning commissioners that meet and discuss these items, so that if we do go the route where staff is working more in conjunction with the planning commission, then we have 2 liaisons from the council that can meet with those planning commissioners to really hash out those issues and then get that information back to council. So that's something else I'd like to support. Other than that, those are my comments, and I'll leave it to Mr. Casey before we adjourn the meeting.
Thank you, council members. I heard kind of split votes about the 3 items, and you don't need to decide today. And so, as I've mentioned to you before, we come back kind of in the first week of June and kind of do kind of the final direction. At this point, I'll probably recommend at that point doing the organizational study and the information technology item, but you'll have another chance there to see if that still feels right or not. And you could defer one, to that kind of next summer process or whatever. But that's kind of what I read from you, and that's the process we'll go. And so you have some time to think about it, and we'll deal with it in first week in June.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. This meeting is adjourned, and we will be back here tomorrow.